Chapter 257. Opening all 36 apertures, calmly absorbing medicinal intent. After the golden plate entered his hands, Zhang Yan found a secluded place and focused on refining the apertures. This closed-door cultivation took an entire 2 years, and when he stopped cultivating and rested, he'd already refined the 35th aperture. At this moment, he felt his entire body heat up. The true fire in his chest was like fire, overflowing his energy ocean. With a light shake, it seemed like it was about to spew out from the aperture. He quickly suppressed his aura and slowly retracted it. In an instant, he kept the bright true fire in one place. When he looked inside, he saw that the golden fire seed was thick like paste, extremely pure and refined. At this moment, there was only one last acupuncture point left in front of him. Whether or not this last aperture could be opened and a complete true fire would be the key for him to condense his core in the future. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Although Zhou Changju was a direct disciple of the Zhou clan, he only opened 32 apertures, which was already very rare. As for Zhang Yan opening 35 apertures, it wasn't unprecedented, but it was extremely rare. As for the 36th aperture, he had never heard of anyone opening it before. Therefore, he didn't know what would happen if he opened it. When cultivators cultivated, unless their cultivation reached an extremely high level, they would follow the path of their predecessors and be careful. They wouldn't dare to take a single wrong step. Otherwise, if they didn't succeed in their cultivation, it would be a small matter. If their foundation was damaged, then it would be hopeless. Even big clans and families spent hundreds of years, and just now, they were slowly figuring out another method to open apertures. In reality, at Zhang Yan's level, he had opened 35 apertures. Even if he didn't open the last aperture, he would still far surpass cultivators of the same generation. However, he was a person who pursued the Grand Dao. Now that he hadn't completed it, how could he stop because of this obstacle? He smiled and reached his hand into his sleeves. Others might not be able to continue, but he had the broken jade in his hand. He could give it a try. He reached out and grabbed the broken jade, calmed himself down, and immersed himself in it. This time, he was very patient and spent 3 months to deduce the cultivation method. When he came out of the broken jade, his face was full of energy. At this moment, he already knew that the biggest obstacle before condensing the core was no longer able to stop him. In his mind, he carefully recalled the situation in the broken jade. He smiled confidently and slowly began to circulate his cultivation technique. As he circulated his qi, his divine will condensed, so he did not notice the passage of time. Suddenly, one day, the 36th acupuncture point throbbed and a sound was heard in his eardrums. However, it was different from the previous time, as a wisp of yin qi was produced from that acupuncture point. The true fire in his energy seemed to be attracted, suddenly rolling up and swallowing it into his body. This wisp of yin qi did not dissipate, but instead squeezed into the inner circle, and in an instant, it pushed all of the essence fire that was originally gathered there and forced it to the outer circle. This true fire immediately formed a situation of yin in the middle of the yang, mixing together into a ball. With a slight rotation, it slowly rotated like a big ball, indescribably wonderful. Although Zhang Yan already knew that this would happen, now that he saw that his cultivation was complete, he couldn't help but reveal a hint of joy on his face. Originally, he felt that it was a pity that the essence of the true fire was gathered into a ball. If he really used it to refine the golden core, he wouldn't be able to use all of the firepower at the same time. But now, when it came time to condense the core, not a single bit of the firepower would be wasted. At this moment, he had already opened all 36 of his acupuncture points. Zhang Yan counted with his fingers. Unknowingly, 3 years had passed. Once he got the last 2 ingredients, he would be able to find a cave to condense the core. He let out a long breath and calmed his mind. He closed his eyes and sat still, calmly waiting for the time to come. After an unknown amount of time, on this day, he suddenly heard the sound of thunder. It was caused by the yin and yang energies attacking each other above the thunder lake of Shindu Peak, causing the thunder to shake. Zhang Yan opened his eyes and a bright light flashed in his eyes. With a flick of his sleeve, he flew up from the stone platform and left the cave in the blink of an eye. He flew towards the place where the thunder rumbled. At this moment, there were many cultivators riding the wind towards the Shindu peak. He didn't pay much attention to them and just flew, arriving at the main peak of the Shindu peak in a short while. At this moment, his eyes narrowed and he saw a group of white-feathered, red-crowned cranes flying in the lightning. They flew back and forth around the peak, and every time a bolt of lightning fell, they would let out happy cries. At this moment, his eyes narrowed and saw a group of white-feathered, red-crowned cranes flying in the lightning. They flew around the peak, and every time a bolt of lightning fell, they would let out joyful cries. There were around 100 cranes in this group, and although they were very eye-catching, they were extremely fast. It would be extremely difficult for normal Mystic Light Realm cultivators to catch them. However, Zhang Yan didn't care and went straight over. When the group of heavenly cranes saw that there were cultivators charging over, they were about to split up and hide in different directions. However, Zhang Yan let out a long cry, and a watercolored curtain of light suddenly appeared behind him, sweeping across the sky. In the blink of an eye, the 100 heavenly cranes disappeared. After collecting the cranes, he didn't stop at all and continued to fly towards the peak. Not long later, he saw another group of demonic birds, and without saying anything, he used his true light to sweep them in. On the way, Zhang Yan's true light of water rose and fell, and groups of demonic birds fell into the screen of water one after another, disappearing without a trace. After sweeping through no less than 1,000 demonic birds, he still didn't wave his hand. At this moment, he saw a huge and extremely fierce green-eyed golden eagle flying in front of him. Zhang Yan laughed loudly. He formed a seal and turned into a ray of green light as he flew up. This type of ferocious demonic bird had great strength, a fierce and courageous temperament, and the steel feathers on its body were not afraid of ordinary magic treasures. Normally, it would rather die than fall into the hands of an enemy. Thus, even if the cultivators who came to collect the medicine encountered it, they would not be in the mood to fight and would let it go. But today, it was completely useless against Zhang Yan. He shook his shoulder, and a deep brilliance swept over. The golden eagle wanted to resist, but how could it do so? As soon as the water curtain fell, it involuntarily fell into the thousands of rivers and was carried away by the current. Originally, the higher one went up God Crossing Peak, the more ferocious the demonic birds were. Even if they weren't a match for cultivators, they could rely on their wings to quickly escape. Normally, there weren't many cultivators who came to capture them. But now that they had encountered Zhang Yan, disaster was imminent. Wherever he flew, the demonic birds were swept away. Zhang Yan thought that with these 1,000 demonic birds in hand, the hidden refining marrow would be enough, so he didn't attack anymore and flew towards the highest point of God Crossing Peak. Not long after, he arrived at the top of the peak. He looked down at the surging pool of lightning, took out the golden plate from his sleeve, and threw it into the air. As soon as this golden metal object appeared, it instantly attracted dozens of golden snake-like lightning bolts. Zhang Yan activated his incantation, and the golden plate began to spin, absorbing the dozens of lightning bolts into it. Harvesting Chuejue thunder also depended on one's luck. Usually, there would be one bolt of essence lightning in every 100 lightning bolts, and the more essence lightning there was, the more effective it would be when condensing the core. The pool of lightning would only vibrate for an hour at a time, so if it didn't work the first time, one could only try again. But if a cultivator found it too troublesome, they could also harvest the hidden refining marrow on another day. However, compared to harvesting it at the same time, it was still inferior. While Zhang Yan was plucking the lightning to his heart's content, there were two people watching from the top of another mountain, watching his every move. One of them was the Ho clan's patriarch, Ho Baksu, and the other was a woman wearing a feather dress and holding a golden ring. This woman had also met Zhang Yan before. She was the Dao companion of Su Gongyuan from Nine Peace Cult. The woman looked at Zhang Yan, then pointed at him and asked the black-clothed Taoist next to her, "Fellow Taoist Sima, who is this?" The black-clothed Taoist thought about it and said, "I don't know this person." The woman's voice suddenly sharpened as she said, "Could it be that Junior Zhang Yan has changed his appearance and is here?" Ho Baksu coughed and said, "Although fellow Taoist Sima can't recognize him, it might not be that Zhang Yan." Lady Su, please don't be impatient. Let me ask him later. Lady Su said in disdain, there's no need to go through so much trouble. He came here alone. Let me capture him and examine him first. When Ho Baksu heard this, his eyelids twitched and he hurriedly stopped her. Fellow Taoist, wait. I see this person's mysterious light. It seems to be a technique from Taihao school. You must know that this is Donghua continent, not Donghai. Fellow Taoist, you must not be reckless. Taihao school? Lady Su hesitated. This time, Su Gongyuan also warned her that it would be fine if she offended others, but if it was the 10 sects of Xianmen, she must not provoke them unless it was absolutely necessary. If she was really impulsive, she would have to escape to the outer endless sea at all costs. This time, she came to find Zhang Yan to avenge her son, so she naturally wouldn't leave so easily. She said irritably, then, according to fellow Taoist Ho, what should I do? Ho Baksu said in a deep voice, fellow Taoist Sima, as a servant under the master of this celestial market, you naturally have sharp eyes and ears. This person's technique is also from the orthodox Xianmen, so he shouldn't be a nobody. Why don't you go and ask around? The black-clothed Taoist nodded. He took out a jade talisman and stretched out his hand to grab a strand of qi, then he absorbed Zhang Yan's appearance into it. Then he cupped his fists and said, I will be right back. In less than the time it took for an incense to burn, he returned and said to the two of them, this person claims to be surnamed Yu, and he appeared here 5 years ago. He seems to be familiar with the manager of the Zhenyu Tower in our celestial market. The appearance of everyone who entered and left the celestial market was reflected by the mirror at the entrance. As a servant of the celestial market, he only needed to make a slight inquiry to know the origin of the other party. Ho Baksu thought for a while and said, surnamed Yu? The Yu clan is a large clan in the southeast. Could it really be from the Taihao school? Lady Su said impatiently, since it's not that kid Zhang Yan, then there's no need to pay attention to it. Ho Baksu shook his head and said, otherwise, there's still something fishy about this person. To be cautious, wait for a while, I'll go and check it out myself. Lady Su was a little puzzled and said in confusion, then why don't you ask now? Su Gongyuan glanced at her and said with a bitter smile, Lady Su, you need to know that this person is collecting herbs now. If this person is really not Zhang Yan, won't I ruin his Tao if I go up rashly? If I attract the elders of his sect out of anger, I won't be able to bear it. It's just an hour, why do you need to be so anxious, Lady Su? Lady Su blushed, snorted, and did not say anything else. While they were talking, Zhang Yan did not stop collecting the lightning. After an hour, he put the golden plate back in his hand and released his spiritual qi to explore it. He found that there were several lightning bolts rolling back and forth, looking very lively. He was also happy that this trip was so smooth, and he thought to himself, next, I just need to find a crypt in half a month, and I can refine the medicine into a pill. He had already thought about it in advance. Although there were many spirit-cleansing crypts in the world, the crypt where the two continents met was the best. The distance between the Donghua continent and the North Darkstar continent was 150,000 miles, which was the border between the two continents. If he used the sword escape technique and flew at a normal speed, it would take about 10 days. When he reached that place, he would have enough time to follow the map. After making up his mind, he did not delay any longer. He absorbed the spiritual qi in the golden core in his abdomen, used the minor heavens shifting escape technique, and turned into a beam of light and flew away. Su Gongyuan saw that he had finished absorbing the lightning and deliberated over his words. He was about to greet him, but before he could open his mouth, his vision blurred and he saw a ray of light heading north. In a flash, it disappeared into the boundless horizon. Target equals _blank. Chapter 258. After leaving the godly crossing peaks, Zhang Yan rode on his sword and activated his true power to the extreme. A rainbow light flew across the blue sky like a flash of lightning or a meteor, flying north day and night. 9 days later, he had already arrived at the intersection of the Donghua continent and the North Darkstar continent. This place was filled with green mountains, clear waters, and beautiful clouds. Between the heavens and the earth, there were undulating peaks, thousands of rocks, and tens of thousands of ravines. The vast mountains surged like waves, and the birds in the sky chased each other. The majestic mountains and rivers made Zhang Yan feel relaxed. He wanted to roar at the sky and wander around freely. However, condensing the core was more important, so he didn't have the mood to look at it. He suppressed the sword light and lowered down from the vast sky, turning into a rainbow as he searched for peaks and valleys. As expected of the place where the two worlds intersected, the spiritual energy was like a tide, and the strong wind was raging, causing his sword gleam to sway incessantly, as if it could be pushed down at any time. He hurriedly steadied the conveyance light and flew carefully, thinking to himself, "No wonder there are so few people here. With the ferocity and speed of my conveyance sword, it's still so strenuous to reach this place, let alone others." In this way, his speed had slightly slowed down, but even then he only used a day and night to find 3 spirit cleansing points, and with a slight inspection, he noticed that all of them were top-notch holes that were filled with clear qi and didn't have a speck of dust on them, and he couldn't help but feel delighted in his heart. He didn't nitpick too much. After choosing one cave, he turned the sword light, broke through the atmosphere, and descended. As soon as he entered the cave, he felt a cool breeze brushing past his face. After a few breaths, he felt his heart and lungs were soothed and his body was at peace. This cave was connected to the roots of the earth. There were thousands of twists and turns inside, like a bottomless ravine. Zhang Yan knew that this place couldn't tolerate any filth, so he flew deeper. After descending for about 10,000 feet, he saw a stone cave that was about 10 feet tall. The cave was full of green vines, and the walls inside looked like they had been washed. It was clean and shiny. It was just enough for one person to go in. His eyes lit up and he smiled. This is it. He took a leap and leapt inside. Then, he grabbed a strand of wood essence qi from his sleeve pouch and pulled a few vines over. He raised his hand and slapped it upwards. With the help of the wood essence qi, it didn't take more than an hour. The vines crawled all over the stone walls. He sealed the entrance to the cave. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and several talisman flew out and stuck to the vine. The talisman flashed slightly and then disappeared. On this trip, although there was no sign of human habitation within 10,000 miles, there was no one. However, he had to be prepared for any eventualities. However, it was clear that it was pointing out the direction. Sealing the door like this was loose on the outside and tight on the inside. It was to use the vines to sense the changes in the qi outside, and it was the safest method. If there were any changes, they could respond in time. After he sat down, he shook his shoulder and activated the water element true light, shaking the demon birds out of the water screen one by one. Then, he slashed at them with the sword light. These demon birds had long lost their sense of direction in the water element true light. They were all muddle-headed and naturally had no ability to resist. Zhang Yan killed them one by one and took out the essence from their spines. Then he stored them in the jade bottles that he had prepared in advance. In just a moment, including the ferocious golden condor, he had killed over 100 demonic birds, and all the jade bottles he carried with him were filled to the brim. Thinking that these hidden refinement marrows were sufficient for him to condense a core, he stopped and released a primordial golden flame mystic light to sweep the remaining blood, feathers, bones, and flesh of these demonic birds. At this moment, his eyes were clear. Now that the 6 internal and external medicines were ready, it was time to refine the medicine and condense the pill. This golden pill was divided into 2 steps. First, he would use the 3 external medicines and the external refining method to refine a pill seed. Then, he would swallow it and finally, he would use the internal refining method to condense the pill. The external refining method was not very difficult. It only required the word clean. From this moment until he condensed the pill, all the spiritual qi that he breathed in and out came from the one qi Ganoderma. Not a single trace of impure qi could be mixed in. However, the external refining method was originally a method to remove the impurities and retain the essence. During the process, it was inevitable that there would be impurities. Therefore, it was necessary to use the extremely clear spiritual qi that circulated in the spirit cleansing cave all year round to wash away the impurities. This action was related to the success or failure of the Great Tao. Zhang Yan did not dare to relax. He quietly adjusted his breathing and calmed his mind. Then he flicked his sleeve and took out the 1 Qi Ganoderma and the bright stone milk. These 2 items combined with the spirit cleansing cave were the 3 external medicines. After the 1 Qi Ganoderma emitted a strand of clear spiritual qi, he took a deep breath. Then, with a low grunt, he activated his Xian Qi. The 81 strands of clear and turbid qi in his qi sea surged and lifted the 5 Xian seeds above his head. The golden pill was the purest thing. Therefore, he needed to release the Xian seed's spiritual qi and use the true fire in his aperture to repeatedly burn it. This would remove all the impurities that were brought into his body by the cloud sand and the evil qi. Then he would use the bright stone milk to nourish it and slowly refine it. In the end, he would be able to form the golden pill. After the golden pill was formed, there would be no difference between qi and essence. Then his Xian Qi would be gathered in one place and become a ball. With just 1 golden pill, he would be able to control the mysterious spiritual qi and the mighty mana. Zhang Yan looked up and concentrated his Xian Qi. With a huala sound, it was as if there was an invisible hand grabbing the 5 Xian seeds and stirring them into a ball. In a split second, they were indistinguishable from each other. After a while, they actually bloomed with a multicolored brilliance. Zhang Yan took the opportunity and made a hand sign. He opened his mouth and drew out the true fire in his aperture from his qi sea and sprayed it on the Xian seed. After being burned by the true fire, the multicolored brilliance seemed to be unable to bear it. It made a crackling sound and seemed to be on the verge of collapse. However, he did not panic and raised his finger. A few drops of bright stone milk flew out from the bottle and poured it on the Xian seed. It was as if a sweet rain had fallen and the spiritual rain was nourishing it. The light halo calmed down again. Gradually, a wisp of black gas floated out from it. However, there was no place for it to stay in this spirit-cleansing cave. As soon as it appeared, it was cleansed by the clear qi in the cave. At this moment, the multicolored brilliance also faded a little. Zhang Yan patiently used the true fire to refine it. Whenever the brilliance showed signs of cracking, he would use his true power and use his spiritual energy to wrap it up. Then he would use the bright stone milk to replenish it. He would not let it dissipate in the slightest. If it was a normal cultivator, they would only have 1 Xian seed and a dozen or so spiritual energy in their qi sea. This method would not even take an hour to complete. However, Zhang Yan had all 5 Xian seeds and a total of 81 mouthfuls of spiritual energy. Naturally, he would have to work several times harder than others. After about a day and night, a low shout came from the cave. Zhang Yan withdrew the true fire and a pure pellet appeared in front of him. It was red and shiny. The round and dazzling Jindan came, and he laughed heartily. He raised his head. Then he swallowed it into his stomach. This pellet was just a pellet seed. He still needed to use the 3 internal medicines and use the internal refining method to refine it. Only then could it become a pellet fruit. He peered into the interior. Looking at the color of the pellet seed, it meant that there would be no problems in the future. It would be above the 4th grade golden pellet. Pellets were divided into 9 grades. Medicine accounted for 3 points and technique accounted for 3 points. Luck accounted for 3 points. Medicine accounted for 3 points. It meant that if the 6 internal and external medicines that a cultivator found were all of high quality, then he would have 3 points of merit. Technique accounted for 3 points. It meant that a cultivator trained hard in Xian techniques. If it was a high-quality technique, then he would have 3 points of merit. And finally, luck accounted for 3 points. It meant that the top 3 medicines were unpredictable. It all depended on the cultivator's own luck and luck. It was impossible to grasp. In reality, he was a disciple of a large sect. If it wasn't for the fact that the cultivator's root was too weak, the technique was not good, or the quality of the 3 external medicines was not good, the pellet would most likely be around the 6th grade. And the tiny mystic light that Zhang Yan cultivated was a high-quality Xian technique. The 3 external medicines were also of high quality. It was not surprising that he could form this pellet seed. However, once this pellet seed was formed, there was no turning back for Zhang Yan. If he couldn't sense the top 3 medicines during the internal refining process, then he could forget about raising the pellet seed. At this point, a solemn expression appeared on his face. Huanshan essence, leakless air, Yingxin fire, these 3 items were the top 3 medicines. Obtaining any one of them could raise one's merit by 1 grade. If one's foundation was above the 4th grade and all 3 medicines were obtained, then the pellet seed would become a 1st grade pellet. However, he had no way of knowing when these 3 medicines should rise, fall, flourish, or decline. Because the external refining method was cultivated outside the body, there were no secrets to speak of. It was just following the prescribed order and following the map. Anyone could do it. However, this internal refining method secretly contained a secret formula. Regardless of master or disciple, they were all taught orally. They were never written down and would not easily show it to others. The reason why the great sects were strong and did not decline, other than having superior cultivation methods and occupying spirit points, was because of the secret passed down from generation to generation. Even if one was lucky enough to encounter immortal fate outside, if it was not compatible with the sect's cultivation method, when condensing the pellet seed, one would not be able to receive guidance from the sect's seniors. Although they would be 1 step ahead of others in the big picture, they could not ask others for help in these small matters. They could only rely on their own luck. And no matter how talented one was or how deep one's foundation was, if one really wanted to achieve the immortal path, there was only 1 chance to condense the pellet seed. If one succeeded, then they succeeded. If not, then they failed. For example, those small golden core cultivators who failed to condense the pellet seed were most likely hopeless. In Qinsong school, although Zhang Yan was Zhou Chongju's disciple, Zhou Chongju was originally a direct disciple of the Zhou sect. The method of condensing the pellet seed was passed down by the Zhou sect for thousands of years. It was completely different from the cultivation method that Zhang Yan cultivated. Because of this, even if he told Zhang Yan everything, it would be useless. Zhang Yan thought to himself that if he was only given 1 chance, he might be able to condense the pellet seed above the 4th grade. But if he wanted to condense the pellet seed into the 1st grade, it was extremely unlikely. But he was not worried. Instead, there was a slight smile on his face. He reached into his sleeve and gently took a piece of hard and smooth jade. With this piece of jade in hand, he could reverse the universe and refine the pellet seed. Even if he did not know the secret of the method, what did he have to fear? He took out the 3 medicines from his sleeve and pointed. The 4 marquee water, the Chuejue thunder, and the hidden refined marrow all flew up. The 4 marquee water turned into a pool of clear water and entered all the orifices on his body. Finally, it was hidden in the lower mansion. The hidden refined marrow was swallowed into his stomach and hidden in the middle mansion. The Chuejue thunder went down from the top of his head and was hidden in the upper mansion. After the 3 medicines were prepared, he slowly closed his eyes and calmed his mind. Then he boldly immersed himself into the remnant of the jade. Suddenly, the clone in the jade that was no different from him opened his eyes and sat up in a lotus position, forming the spell. But after a while, he retreated from the jade and said quietly, "Although the pellet seed has reached the 3rd grade, it is still far from my expectations. I still need to try again." He calmed himself down and his mind sank into the remnant of the jade again. After this round of attempts, a day passed in the outside world. When his mind retreated again, he was deep in thought. He thought to himself, out of 10 times, I can condense the Huanshan essence 5 or 6 times. It must be because the 3 medicines in my body are all high grade. As for the leakless wind, I've only seen it once. But that's not a problem. I'll just have to deduce it a few more times. However, he wasn't worried. Once the 3 medicines appeared during his deduction, he could memorize the steps and details of the process. Then, he would practice it over and over again until he completely grasped the method. Thus, in the following days, he deduced again and again in the remnant of the jade. He didn't know how many times he had gone through it. Finally, he familiarized himself with the secrets of the leakless wind and the Huanshan essence. At this point, he had comprehended the method to form a 2nd grade pellet seed. If his goal was only to stop here, He could already refine medicine into pellets. However, he was someone who wanted to become a celestial one day. How could he be satisfied with this step? The path to forming a pellet seed was to climb the heaven ladder. The heaven ladder wasn't high. How could he climb the heaven ladder? Zhang Yan frowned. The only obstacle in front of him was the Ing heart flame. He had deduced it thousands of times in the remnant of the jade, but he still didn't have the chance to see it. Originally, he didn't need to rush. He just needed to continue deducing it. If he couldn't do it 100 times, then he would do it 1,000 times. If he couldn't do it 1,000 times, then he would do it 10,000 times. However, there was a bottleneck here. It had already been 12 days since he left God Crossing Peak. The other medicines were easy to deal with. However, the Chuejue thunder could only hide in the palace for 3 more days. After 2 hours, it would disappear. Therefore, he needed to obtain the Ing heart flame technique in the remaining 3 days. Only then would he be able to refine a first-grade pellet fruit. Zhang Yan found it weird. One had to know that there was no difference between the 3 medicines. Why did the other 2 always appear but the Ing heart flame was so hard to find? He pondered over it over and over again, deep in thought. Ing Xen Hua. Suddenly, his eyebrows jumped. He thought back to the situation when he broke through to the mystic light realm and a light bulb flashed in his head. Wasn't this flame referring to his heart? If he didn't have a heart that didn't fear danger on the path of cultivation and only cared about his life, he would just be a corpse-guard slave. How could he talk about reaching the Grand Tao? He was able to deduce techniques in the remnant jade, but it could only help him reach the void wind and complete essence. He lacked the mentality of not turning back until he saw the Grand Tao. At this moment, he could only toss the remnant jade aside and give up on his path of retreat. Only then would he be able to see the truth. Since that's the case. His eyes flashed and he stopped circulating his technique. He sat there silently and waited for the days to pass. He was going to wait until the last day to condense the pill and not give himself any path of retreat. 2 days passed quickly and in the blink of an eye, it was the 15th day. A resolute aura slowly appeared in his eyes. At this moment, he had cut off all means of retreat and forced himself to the edge of the cliff. Success or failure would depend on this. He sat on the rock and looked inside his aura sea. He first drew out the hidden refinement marrow in his middle mansion and placed it on the core seed. After circulating it slightly, it was all absorbed by the core seed. After that, with a turn of the pill seed, the ball of true fire was sucked in. After a while, the door to his mansion opened up a gap, and in an instant, the lightning was excited. A bolt of lightning descended and impatiently struck the pill seed, as if it wanted to break it in one go. This lightning was used to refine the core. One couldn't see any power when bathing in lightning outside, but it was very fierce inside the body. After being struck by the lightning, the core seed couldn't help but tremble. A few cracks appeared on the originally bright surface. The true fire seeped out and the color of the core seed dimmed. Zhang Yan didn't panic. He only guided the water from the 4 marquises up from his lower mansion and poured it into the core seed. With the nourishment of the clear spirit water and the true fire, the core seed became moist again. The cracks gradually showed signs of healing. At this moment, he circulated the core seed again and continued to absorb the spiritual chi and spiritual chi around him. After a while, he opened the door to his mansion and guided a bolt of lightning to descend. He continued to refine the core seed. After an unknown amount of time, his body suddenly trembled and a speck of light appeared from his lower mansion and slowly floated up. Zhang Yan knew that this was the essence of Huanshan. He didn't hesitate anymore. He circulated the core seed and carefully absorbed it. Once he obtained this medicine, the cracks on the core seed became as thin as a spider's web. If he didn't look closely, he wouldn't have noticed it. After a while, he suddenly felt his upper mansion shake and a gust of clear chi came out like the wind. When this wind came, it was extremely ferocious. It rushed left and right, desperately trying to get out of his body. It was as if it wanted to push his body open. Even if it chased and blocked him with all its might, it still insisted on getting out of his body through his pores. Zhang Yan's expression didn't change. He had already encountered this situation hundreds of times in the broken jade. He knew how to deal with it and didn't panic. He just circulated the spirit-comprehending contract mysterious technique. His body instantly became as hard as metal, like a block. This leakless wind immediately had nowhere to go. After wandering for a while, it seemed to have found its final home and climbed towards the core seed. Zhang Yan had been waiting for a long time. He circulated the core seed and with a tremble, the medicine was absorbed into the core seed like the essence of Huanchen. After obtaining 2 pills in a row, the golden core instantly became dazzling, bright, and smooth. The cracks on it were slowly closing up. At this stage, if the last pill did not appear, when the crack completely closed, the pill would condense into a flawless pill and could only become a second-grade golden pill. However, the Ying Exine fire was still nowhere to be seen. At this last moment, Zhang Yan only felt that his beer was clear and clear. The various scenes since he started cultivating flashed before his eyes. After that, everything went far away from him, leaving only nothingness. Gradually, he seemed to understand that there was a big net covering him in this world, preventing him from taking this step. At this critical moment, an obsession suddenly rose in his heart. No matter how you cage me, if you want to stop me from achieving Dao, you can't. His firm and unparalleled heart, in a split second, transformed into a will that vowed to split the heaven and earth, suddenly breaking through that layer of shackles. Suddenly, a clump of fire was ignited in his heart, endless light was released, rushing to the Dan seed and burning it. At this moment, the crack on the Dan seed coincidentally closed. He only felt a loud bang in his head, a dense stream of energy was boiling. In a split second, it flowed through the meridians and apertures of his body. After a while it calmed down. When he retracted his chi and opened his eyes again, he saw an extremely clear, pure, glass-like core seed falling into his stomach. Zhang Yan laughed heartily and recited, "Outside the mountains to find medicine to grind the Tao heart, in the world of 2 continents to comprehend the true nature, the core seed is glazed golden scarlet fruit. I want to climb the peak to understand the wonders." In the west, the golden drum gathers the shape of a tiger. From the east comes the purple chi leaps and roars of a dragon. Once the golden cauldron is overturned, 108,000 clouds rise. After chanting, he shook his sleeves and shook the core seed. He turned into a cloud like smoke and instantly rushed through thousands of mountains and rivers, straight into the clouds. Target equals, _blank. Chapter 259. Date, September 18th. Several days passed as Zhang Yan flew on the cloud. He looked at the boundless mountains and rivers between the 2 continents, the picturesque mountains and rivers. He also sighed with emotion in his heart. If he was just an ordinary person, he would only look through the green and jade and sigh. How could he ride the wind and travel tens of thousands of li, roaming the world like this? 20 years had passed since he left the Qinsong school. He had already succeeded in refining pills and was very different from when he was at the mystic light realm. Every move he made was accompanied by mist and fog. Once a cultivator stepped into the core transformation realm, the profound energy in the cultivator's body would transform into the baleful energy within the core. When it soared and circulated, it would be like mist and mist, auspicious and auspicious clouds. It was truly vast and ethereal, light and otherworldly, and had the aura of an immortal. Above the misty clouds in the sky, between the north and the south, there were countless strong gales raging. The clouds were like dragons and tigers, and they roared like the tide. When Zhang Yanfang arrived here, it was extremely difficult for him to even stabilize his flying light. But now, he was flying through the blue sky as if he was doing nothing, free and unrestrained, and he didn't feel the slightest hindrance. As he was flying, his eyes turned and he suddenly saw a tall and dangerous mountain. The peak was lonely and the cliff was thousands of feet high. It was very majestic. He couldn't help but praise it in his heart. He pressed down on the cloud and landed on the peak of the mountain. Looking at the waves of the sea of clouds, it was like a boundless giant wave, slowly rolling and forming wind and clouds. His mind calmed down and a slight smile appeared on his lips. He experienced the many wonders of the pill after it was formed. He opened his palm and looked over. A white smoke flew out from his acupuncture point. With a change of his mind, it turned into a flying horse, a white elephant, a fierce bird, a flood dragon, and many other shapes. Seeing that the smoke could be controlled at will, he couldn't help but nod his head slightly. He exerted force again and the smoke rolled forward, instantly splitting a ravine in the sea of clouds in front of him. Zhang Yan was also surprised. He didn't expect the power of his pill to be so great. He couldn't help but think. Even the primordial unity golden fire mystic light would be instantly destroyed if it were to encounter this kind of smoke. He stood silently for a moment, then stretched out 2 fingers and pointed. 2 wisps of smoke flew out from his fingertips. One of them was a green mist. On his finger was the blue mist wave. As he used his Xian Qi to control it, the 2 wisps of mist immediately changed color. 5 lights flowed. However, if he was distracted for even a moment, the radiance would fade away and turn back into 2 puffs of white smoke. When a cultivator was at the mystic light realm, their mystic light would belong to the 5 elements because they cultivated Xian seeds. This pill fiend was the same, but it was a pill fiend. But it could not be distinguished purely from external appearances. Zhang Yan had once heard from Fan Chongqing that after the pill was formed, there were many female cultivators who liked to gather sand essences of various colors and refine them into the baleful pill. Although this couldn't increase the might of the baleful pill, in this way, no matter if it was fighting with others or flying through the clouds, the baleful qi they summoned would always be extremely beautiful, bright, and gorgeous. Zhang Yan preferred black colors, but he didn't want to waste time gathering sand essences to change the appearance of the baleful qi. Moreover, those cultivators who flew in the sky with thick black clouds were people of the demon Dao. They weren't from the orthodox Xian sects, so they were just inviting trouble for themselves. He smiled faintly and waved his sleeve. The wisps of smoke suddenly dispersed and turned into a vast cloud that covered the mountains and the sea. It mixed with the sea of clouds and churned endlessly. At this time, a pondering expression appeared on his face. After a while, he sat down cross-legged and circulated the 5 elemental true light. After a while, he stopped the incantation and thought to himself, "Sure enough, after stepping into the core transformation stage, I can cultivate the 5 elemental true light much faster than before. With my current magic power, it will only take me a few months to cultivate the earth elemental true light to the initial stage. When I return to the sect, I will have one more thing to rely on when fighting with others." Earlier, when he was on Divine Crossing Peak, even though he refined his acupoints every single day, he hadn't given up on this technique and cultivated it bitterly without end. In terms of cultivation, he'd attained 5 or 6 years of attainment now, and he was only a step away. He coveted the position of the top 10 disciples and knew that when the time came, he would definitely fight with his fellow sect members. It would be good to have more tricks up his sleeve. Moreover, after returning to the sect, he might not be free for a period of time and might not have the time to settle down and cultivate. Therefore, he prepared to cultivate outside for a few more days and improve his Dao technique a bit before returning to the sect. However, before returning to the sect, he still had a few things to do. First, he had an agreement with Hibiko Higashi. Hibiko Higashi would protect him when he left Mount Qing Siuan. After he condensed his Dan, he would have to return the Ganoderma to Hibiko Higashi. Another thing was that he had promised Mr. Shi that he would recommend one of his juniors to the Xianmen sect to cultivate. He already had a plan in mind for this matter. He wanted to recommend this old junior to the Beichen sect. That day, he promised Elder Yan to go overseas and bring back a few juniors. Although this matter had changed, he still had to give an explanation when he returned. Moreover, Lu Mainyang would bring her brother to his heavenly lake of Zhaoyu to cultivate. This woman was Elder Yan's official wife, so he could not mention her. As for the junior Mr. Shi, he could bring him along. When he thought of this, he suddenly remembered something. His expression changed and he shouted, "Where is Zhangju?" Following this shout, a young boy with delicate features came out. However, his face was old and steady. He bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "Master, I am here. What instructions do you have for me?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I asked you to take care of the treasure's true spirit that day. How is it now?" Mountain River Child said, "Master, this true spirit's intelligence was originally not high. She was tricked by her master and tried to use the true spirit's essence to break her nascent soul. She wanted to use this to become a heavenly abode. However, she failed on the verge of success. Not only did she die, her true spirit's vitality was greatly damaged. Now, she can't even remember who she is." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Let me see." Mountain River Child responded. He didn't seem to move, but a painting of mountains and rivers unfolded under his feet. In the painting, there were mountains and rivers, flowers and trees, birds and beasts. He called out softly. Not long after, a 13 or 14-year-old girl in white walked out of the painting. Her black hair draped over her shoulders, her eyebrows like willow leaves, and her chin was sharp. Her face was delicate and elegant, but her face was pale. Her body was petite and slightly thin, as if she could be blown away by a gust of wind. When she looked around, her eyes were slightly blank. When she looked at Zhang Yan, her shoulders trembled and her eyes revealed fear. She hurriedly hid behind Mountain River Child and didn't dare to poke her head out. However, her body was still trembling. Mountain River Child smiled bitterly and said, "She was frightened by the North Dark Sword spirit on you. Therefore, she is especially afraid of you. If you want to sacrifice and refine this treasure, I'm afraid it won't be easy." Zhang Yan shook his head and sighed, "I didn't expect a killing treasure to become like this." Mountain River Child also sighed and said, "A few hundred years ago, I met her once. At that time, she didn't look like this. She really had a murderous aura and was extremely fierce. When she used it, she would take lives. I don't know how many powerful cultivators have been killed by this blade, but now she has ended up like this. I think it's because she followed the wrong master. After Zhang Yan killed Shinming Gu of the Chongyue True Temple, he found the Yin-killing blade in his sleeve. However, for some reason, the true spirit in the blade looked extremely weak, as if it could dissipate at any time. Zhang Yan had vaguely heard of the original reputation of this blade. It was extremely fierce. If it hadn't been sacrificially refined, it would be extremely dangerous for him to keep it by his side. However, this blade was a profound artifact. Although it was heavily injured, he had no reason to give it away. Thus, he ordered Mountain River Child to find a way to lure the true spirit into the Mountain River diagram. If the magic treasure true spirit took the initiative to enter the body of the same kind, it would be equivalent to binding one's own hands and feet, unable to use any methods. Although this Mountain River diagram was not a killing treasure, it was still a profound artifact. Its body was sturdy, and in addition to the fact that the Yin-killing true spirit had long forgotten its own body, it was extremely easy for Mountain River Child to coax it into the diagram, unable to come out. Once the true spirit in the blade was separated from the main body, Zhang Yan had no worries and boldly kept the Yin-killing blade in his bag. Previously, he had been running around in search of medicine, so he didn't have the heart to ask about it. However, now that he had succeeded in refining the pill, he thought of this matter again. If the magic treasure true spirit had cultivated to the point where it could leave its body, it wouldn't be so troublesome. It could just be sacrificially refined into a body. However, in this situation, if he really wanted to control this profound artifact, the true spirit had to agree to it. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, and a strange thought suddenly appeared in his mind. He vaguely felt that the ownership of this magic treasure might not necessarily fall on him. This thought came out of nowhere, as if it had suddenly emerged from the bottom of his heart. No matter how he thought about it, there was no way to investigate it. He smiled. It was just an external object. If he got it, it would just be the icing on the cake. If he lost it, there would be no loss. Why should he care too much about it? He then said to Mountain River Child, "Let her continue to stay in your Mountain River diagram. We will discuss this matter when I return to the mountain." Mountain River Child was clever and immediately agreed. He sank into the Mountain River diagram with the Yin-killing true spirit. Then, the diagram rolled up along the scroll and was put away. Zhang Yan pointed his finger and the item flew back into his sleeves. Then he soared into the sky and rode on the sword light, heading south. It took him 7 days to come to the boundary of the two continents. Now that he returned to the East Flower Continent, his speed was more than twice as fast. In just 3 days, he returned to the boundary of the Shindu Peak. He looked around and saw the flying boat Celestial Market again. He couldn't help but think, I still have hundreds of demon birds with me, but I don't need them anymore. It's useless to bring them back. Why don't I find a place to sell them? It's better than leaving them in the true light. Thinking of this, he put away the sword light and turned into a cloud of smoke that wrapped around him and headed to the flying boat Celestial Market. It was noon, and there were many cultivators coming and going in the Celestial Market. When they saw him flying toward the gate, their faces changed. They all retreated to the sides and didn't dare to compete with him. There was a cultivator who was a bit rash. When he saw that there was no one in front of the gate, he was about to rush forward, but he was suddenly pulled back by his companion. He didn't know why, but when he was about to get angry, his companion whispered something in his ear. He looked at Zhang Yan, and his face instantly turned pale. He almost lost his balance on the cloud. Zhang Yan naturally didn't care about them. After passing the main gate of the Celestial Market, he suddenly felt something. He looked at the mirror hanging on the gate and frowned. He simply put away the smoke and flew in the direction of the Treasure Jade Tower. Target equals _blank. Chapter 260. Distinguishing the true face-seeking revenge in the Celestial Market. Zhang Yan found the right direction, and after a few turns, he arrived in front of the Treasure Jade Tower. However, when he stepped inside, the person who greeted him was not Steward Wang, who he had seen 5 years ago, but a middle-aged scholar with white hair at the temples and a green robe. Seeing Zhang Yan, he greeted him with a smile and said, "Honorable guest, I wonder what item has caught your eye in our tower?" Zhang Yan asked curiously, "Is the original steward not here?" "Honorable guest, are you talking about Steward Wang?" The middle-aged scholar frowned and his eyes showed vigilance. He sized up Zhang Yan for a moment, and his enthusiasm from before had slightly decreased as he said with a slightly stiff tone, "I'll let honored guest know that this person is insatiably greedy. His younger brother stole an external technique of my Zhejiang Tan clan, and he was despised by his fellow Taoists. Now he's fled without a trace, and his whereabouts are unknown." He was only at the level of clear qi, so he could not tell the depth of Zhang Yan's cultivation. Previously, there were also people who came to pick a fight with Steward Wang's old friend. Through their words, they subtly pointed out that he had the backing of the Tan family, so he could not be bullied by others. When Zhang Yan heard this, he only felt a little emotional and was not surprised. When Wang Huan told everyone about how he knew how to raise white-whiskered rats, he knew that such a day would come. Needless to say, the Tan clan must have coveted this technique of the Wang clan and took it by force. Without the corresponding cultivation, no matter how good the external technique was, it would be like a child holding gold. It would be difficult to protect it, and in the end, it would become a wedding dress for others. He shook his head and asked again, "When did this happen?" The middle-aged scholar frowned and looked at him. Judging from his extraordinary bearing, he could tell that he was not an ordinary person. Thus, he answered patiently, "About 4 to 5 years ago." Zhang Yan nodded and did not pursue the matter further. He said, "I have many demon birds here from Shindu Peak. Does the innkeeper accept them?" Speaking of business, the middle-aged scholar suddenly became spirited. The smile on his face returned, and he said, "I wonder how many demonic birds you have brought? You should know that our restaurant does not do small business." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't know the exact number. Roughly estimating, there are about 700 demon birds." This was different from normal cultivators who could only capture them one by one. Back then, he had swept the demonic beasts into the true light in groups. These 700 or so demonic beasts were undoubtedly a shocking number. If he was still a mystic light realm cultivator, he would have to be careful, but now that he was at the core formation realm, he didn't have to worry about this. Over 700? The middle-aged scholar was calm at first, but after hearing the number, he was shocked. He almost thought he had heard wrong. He stared at Zhang Yan and couldn't help but ask again, "How much?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Only more, not less." The middle-aged scholar's eyes revealed a surprised expression. He subconsciously took 2 steps back and stared at Zhang Yan. After a moment, he came back to his senses. He lowered his head and thought for a moment. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Honorable guest, the number of demon birds is quite large. I can't make the decision. Please wait for a moment. I will go and invite the owner here." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Please go ahead, innkeeper." The middle-aged scholar hurriedly entered the inner hall. Not long after, he returned with a young cultivator. This person was a mystic light realm cultivator, and his expression changed slightly after seeing Zhang Yan. He had good eyesight and could tell that Zhang Yan was a core formation realm cultivator when he saw the faint smoke coming from Zhang Yan's nose. He didn't dare to be slow and quickly caught up. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Tan Zhong, a disciple of the Ji Zhang Tan clan. May I ask your name?" Zhang Yan said faintly, "My surname is Zhang, and I'm a disciple of the Qinsong school." Tan Zhong was shocked and hurriedly bowed again. He said hurriedly, "Your presence brings light to my humble abode. Please come in and have a seat of honor." As he spoke, he moved to the side. Although he was a disciple of the Tan clan and could be considered to be from a Xian Gate family, he was born of a concubine, and his bloodline was far from the main family. His talent wasn't high, and after entering the mystic light realm, he had wasted dozens of years and his cultivation hadn't improved at all. This was why he was thrown here to guard this new property. In the past, there were disciples of the Qinsong school who came to the celestial market, but most of them were disciples of the same master and disciple branch. However, in his eyes, no matter what master and disciple family they were from, the Qinsong school was a monster he couldn't easily offend. However, Zhang Yan smiled and waved his hand. He said, "Fellow Tan, there's no need to go through so much trouble. I still have important matters to attend to. If you can buy all of these demonic birds, I'll give them all to you." Tan Zhong couldn't help but feel troubled. He didn't know if these demonic birds were dead or alive, good or bad, so how could he offer a price? He had once taken care of the clan property for the clan, so he knew that among the 10 great sects of the celestial sect, some disciples would often bring some worthless magical tools over and force people like them to buy them. If it was a shop with a small background, in order to not offend the other party, they would be willing to suffer a bit. He thought that Zhang Yan was the same. Putting aside the fact that the other party was a disciple of the Qinsong school, he couldn't afford to offend a core formation cultivator. He gritted his teeth and said, "If it's just a single demonic bird, it's worth around 20 spirit shells. 700 demonic birds, rounded up to 10,000 spirit shells. How about it, immortal?" However, after saying this price, his heart was bleeding. He hoped that the other party wouldn't go too far. One had to know that the longer a demonic bird cultivated, the more valuable the marrow it contained would be. However, these demonic birds were also very difficult to catch. In his opinion, 700 demonic birds weren't anything good. However, Zhang Yan smiled and nodded. He said, "Let's go with this price." Tan Zhong immediately heaved a sigh of relief. He smiled bitterly in his heart. Fortunately, this person's appetite isn't big. Otherwise, if the clan blames me, it will only be my fault. He calmed himself and cupped his hands. "Immortal, where do you keep these demonic birds? Do you need me to send someone to retrieve them?" Zhang Yan smiled and clapped his hands. A cloud of smoke rose up. Tan Zhong only felt that there was a vast expanse of whiteness in front of him. He couldn't see anything clearly. When the thick fog dissipated, he couldn't help but be dumbfounded. In the entire hall, there were already hundreds of unconscious demonic birds piled up. He was absent-minded for a moment, then cried out involuntarily, "Sky crane? Tonghu?" The demonic bird species in front of him were some of the most difficult to catch. He instantly knew that he had gotten a great bargain this time. At this moment, in a flying building in the celestial market, Priest Sima sat on a praying mat. His brows were tightly furrowed as though he was in a difficult situation. Previously, when Zhang Yan passed through the signboard gate, he saw from the mirror that this person was the person Ho Baksu and Lady Su were looking for. According to the previous agreement, he should have immediately sent someone to inform them. However, he was somewhat hesitant at this moment. Originally, he didn't know who Ho and Su were looking for. Because the two of them offered a lot of rewards, he was in urgent need of spirit shells. Also, he owed the Ho clan a favor back then, so he couldn't refuse. Thus, he agreed. However, afterwards, he felt that something wasn't right. How could the person that the two of them were looking for be an ordinary person? Thus, he secretly sent someone to investigate the identity of this Zhang Yan. The report that came back shocked him. He felt that he had jumped into a pit. A direct disciple of the Qinsong school. He frowned. From the mirror, he could see that Zhang Yan was still a core formation cultivator who had succeeded in concocting medicine. Of course, he knew how important this was. Although he was willing to help Ho Baksu, he didn't want to get himself into trouble. After a while, he finally made a decision. He shouted in a deep voice, "Come in." Immediately, a rather capable young cultivator with bright eyes walked in. He cupped his hands and said, "Servant Sima, what orders do you have for me?" Priest Sima first instructed in a low voice. Then he said, "When you see him, tell him that someone is looking for trouble with him. Let him be on his guard." The young cultivator didn't dare to ask any more questions. He bowed and left with the order. Not long after, Ho Baksu and Lady Su, who had received the news earlier, also hurried over. Lady Su shouted impatiently, "Brother Sima, has that little thief appeared?" Lady Su's unique sharp voice made Priest Sima frown. He coughed and said, "An hour ago, I found that person here. After careful investigation, it was indeed the person you two are looking for." Ho Baksu's expression instantly became excited. Lady Su also widened her almond-shaped eyes. She gripped the ribbon in her hand so tightly that her nails seemed to be digging into her flesh. The two of them had waited on God Crossing Peak for many years, but they didn't see Zhang Yan. Instead, they offended many people and even had disagreements with each other. If it wasn't for Ho Baksu's persistence and promises, Lady Su would have left long ago. Now that she heard this news, she couldn't help but be overjoyed. Lady Su felt that her revenge was about to be avenged. However, Ho Baksu was much more cautious. After the excitement passed, he asked doubtfully, "Are you sure you didn't see wrongly?" Priest Sima's expression was calm as he said, "If the description is correct, then it's this person without a doubt." "Good." Ho Baksu cupped his hands at Priest Sima and said seriously, "No matter if we can kill this little thief or not, we still have to thank you for your kindness." Priest Sima waved his hand lightly and said, "You don't have to be so polite. I have also benefited a lot from you too, but I have something to tell you." Ho Baksu said, "Please speak, fellow Taoist." Priest Sima cupped his hands at the two of them and said, "This is the Flying Boat Celestial Market. If you two want to take revenge, please give me some face and wait for this person to leave the Celestial Market. What do you think?" Ho Baksu looked at Lady Su and saw that she didn't have any objections, so he nodded and said, "Okay, fellow Taoist Sima has helped us a lot these years. It won't be too late for us to make a move after this little thief leaves the Celestial Market." Lady Su gritted her teeth and said, "Today is the day this little thief will be beheaded. I will kill this thief with my own hands and take revenge for my son." Ho Baksu laughed and said, "Don't worry, lady. With the two of us, no matter how strong he is just a mystic light realm cultivator. We will definitely succeed. However, according to what we said before, this person's head will belong to me." Priest Sima watched coldly from the side. No one knew if he forgot or did it on purpose, but he didn't tell the two that Zhang Yan was now a core formation cultivator. Target equals _blank. Chapter 261. Zhang Yan accepted the 10,000 spirit shells that Tanzhong gave him, then stepped on a cloud of smoke and slowly floated out of the Treasure Jade building. The Great Wall advertisement for full-text TXT download at this moment, outside the flying building, there was a young cultivator flying back and forth on a magic treasure. This person was only of Ming-Chi cultivation, but when he saw Zhang Yan coming out from the flying tower, he did not avoid him. Instead, he put on a happy expression and welcomed him. "Senior is really here. Last time we parted in a hurry and I did not have the chance to greet you. Pang Zhang is so fortunate to be able to see Senior's face again today." Just now, he received Priest Sima's order and secretly found this place. Even though he knew that Zhang Yan was in this precious jade building, because he was acquainted with the Tan disciple, he was afraid that the disciple would expose his identity, so he didn't want to enter. Now that he saw Zhang Yan, he pretended to be acquainted and greeted him. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. His mind was sharp. This person was a complete stranger to him, but he acted as if he knew him very well, so he must have something to say to him in private. With his current cultivation, he wasn't afraid that the other party would play any tricks, so he followed the other party's words and said, "So it's Pang Zhang. I haven't seen you in a while. And come with me. I have something I want to ask you." Pang Zhang let out a long sigh of relief. When he spoke to Zhang Yan just now, he was also uneasy. The difference in their cultivation was too great. Although they were in the celestial market, looking at the servant Sima, if the other party was dissatisfied and killed him, no one would stand up for him. The two of them walked to the side. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back. He glanced at Pang Zhang and said, "You can say whatever you want to say." Pang Zhang bowed respectfully to Qin Shi and said in a half-truth, "Senior, I came here because I was entrusted by a senior. He ordered me to come here and tell Senior that there seem to be two people outside the market that harbor ill intent towards Senior. It's just that they don't dare to make a move in the celestial market. I hope that Senior will be more careful when you leave this place." After he finished speaking, he didn't dare to stay any longer. He then bowed to Zhang Yan before taking his leave. Zhang Yan glanced at this person's back and smiled. With his current cultivation level, it was impossible for him to escape. As long as it was not Reverend Yuanying, even if he could not win, he could escape in time. If he was still a mystic light realm cultivator. After hearing these words, he naturally had to put in a lot of effort to think and plan. Think through all the joints. Just now, he dared to act boldly. But now, he didn't even need to think about whether this person was telling the truth or not. If someone came to stop him, he could just wield his sword and kill them. This was the gap brought about by the difference in cultivation. At this time, Ho Baksu and Lady Su were waiting patiently in a temple, waiting for Zhang Yan to leave before they could make their move. But somehow, Ho Baksu suddenly felt a little uneasy. It seemed that once one's cultivation had reached this level, one would be able to faintly sense one's own fortune and misfortune. However, this was usually just a sudden thought or a sudden impulse that was mixed in with countless thoughts. If one did not deliberately pay attention to it, it would probably be thrown to the back of one's mind in a moment. Advertisement for Dex download, however, the feeling of irritation lingered, causing his heart to be shrouded in a layer of haze. After his meeting with Lady Su, he just now knew that the reason Zhang Yan was able to repeatedly kill his peers in the outer endless sea was because he knew a secret technique that seemed to be able to raise his cultivation level to the level of a core formation cultivator in a short period of time. However, after discussing it, the two of them felt that this technique could not be used for long, but there was no need to worry too much. Ho Baksu touched the 5-spirit white carp shuttle in his sleeve, and his mind calmed down once again. He snickered coldly in his heart. He had the treasures that the Shao family had given him, and even if that junior had secret techniques, he was still a mystic light realm cultivator. How could he be a match for the two of them? When this item came out of the Great Void Defense Formation that day, he knew that his nephew had died in the formation. At that moment, he felt hopeless. He had been stuck at the first level of the core formation for dozens of years, and he could not advance even an inch even if he cultivated hard. Now that he was old and weak, he knew that there was no hope for him to cultivate in this life. He could only reincarnate and cultivate again. However, Ho Sanlang was the most outstanding disciple in his family, and he had the hope of condensing his core. If he was successful, he could even reincarnate into the profound gate. Thus, he painstakingly cultivated Ho Sanlang for many years. But now, all of this had gone up in smoke. So, he threw all his hatred onto Zhang Yan. If it wasn't for this person, how could his nephew have died? Thinking about this, he became even more hateful. He turned around and saw that Lady Su's eyes were filled with cold lightning. Her face was twisted, and she was full of killing intent. She looked like she was gnashing her teeth. He believed that when she fought with Zhang Yan, He didn't need to say anything and she would charge forward at the first moment. Ho Baksu was slightly relieved. He felt that he was a bit suspicious. This time he even brought this girl here. If two core formation cultivators couldn't take down a mystic light realm cultivator, then he might as well kill himself. At this moment, a Taoist child walked in and said respectfully, "Seniors, Master ordered me to come and tell you that the person you are looking for has come out of the Treasure Jade Tower and is coming out from the west gate of the Celestial Market." Before he finished speaking, Lady Su was already impatient. She immediately turned into a wisp of smoke and flew out. Ho Baksu didn't forget to take care of the child and said, "Go back and tell fellow Taoist Sima that this old man thanks you." After saying that, he also leaped up, and with a gust of wind under his armpits, he chased after Madame Su. The two of them sped all the way out of the Celestial Market and stopped in front of the west gate. Not a moment later, they saw a tall and straight figure fly out from the gate. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and he looked extraordinary. How could Lady Su forget his appearance? She screamed, "Junior, give me back my child's life." She raised a glistening yellow-golden ring and slashed it over. Seeing that someone was really attacking him, Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. He didn't move, but a wisp of smoke appeared in front of him and blocked the golden ring. He looked up and saw two people standing in front of him. One was a dignified old man with white hair and a white beard, and the other was a woman with a willow waist and thin eyebrows wearing a rainbow-colored feather dress. Zhang Yan had seen this lady once in the outer Endless Sea, so he naturally wouldn't forget her. He smiled and said, "So it's Lady Su. Why aren't you enjoying yourself in Mount Zhou? Why are you looking for me?" Seeing his relaxed and leisurely appearance, and seeing that his entire body was shrouded in smoke and illusory mist, these two people's expressions changed slightly, and they couldn't help but be somewhat startled. Lady Su had been blinded by hatred. He didn't think about anything else, but at this moment, his heart clenched. With a trembling voice, he said, "Fellow Taoist Ho, could it be that this junior is really at the core transformation stage?" For a large sect like the Qinsong school, if a disciple who obtained a true inheritance stepped into the core transformation stage in one step, it would be extremely terrifying. As a Yao cultivator, she naturally knew this, so she was afraid. Ho Baksu saw that the situation was not good. He immediately shouted, "Lady Su, don't panic. Even if this person has really reached the Jindan stage, he still hasn't returned to the sect. He cultivated the various magical powers of the Qinsong school. How powerful can he be? With the two of us joining hands, do you think we can't defeat him? Don't panic." Lady Su was startled when she heard this. Although the true disciples of the Qinsong school who were above the core transformation stage were powerful, they were not as powerful as the core transformation stage disciples. However, that was only after one had cultivated the 3 skills and 5 scriptures, or divine powers and Taoist techniques. However, Zhang Yan, a disciple who went out to search for medicine, could not compare to him. After thinking this through, their courage was instantly boosted. They grabbed the colorful ribbon and were about to attack again. But how could Zhang Yan give them this opportunity? He pointed his hand and a wisp of smoke suddenly flew out, shooting straight towards Lady Su. Lady Su hastily tilted her head. The smoke flew past her ear like an arrow and brushed past her ear. She was so scared that her beautiful face turned pale. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Zhang Yan took a step forward. Originally, he was several tens of feet away from the two people, but with just one step, he was already within 10 feet of them. Then he shouted loudly and shook his shoulder. A watery light curtain rose from his back and fell on the two people's heads and faces. This wave of watery light was like a turbulent sea or a river flowing in reverse. It was so powerful that it almost covered half of the sky. The two people did not expect that Zhang Yan would be able to get close to them so easily. It was too late for them to react and dodge. Mrs. Su had no choice but to wave the ribbon, hoping to use the magical weapon in her hand to turn the situation around. Who would have thought that the water curtain would shake again and again? She felt a boundless force coming towards her, pulling her towards the water curtain. She tried her best to steady herself, but she was still unable to stand steadily. She had no choice but to let go of the ribbon in her hand, only to see a flash of water. The ribbon disappeared without a trace. Hobaksu was swept by the watery light. He also felt as if his body was sinking into a surging river. He swayed left and right, unable to stabilize his body. He did not expect Zhang Yan to be so powerful. He knew that if he did not use his trump card now, he would not have another chance. He shouted loudly and took out the 5-element white carp shuttle. Once this magic weapon appeared, it released a floating light. Even the water element true light could not contain it. It swayed like a fish and broke free from the restraint. It rushed towards Zhang Yan's face. Zhang Yan took a glance and instantly recognized the origins of this treasure, and he couldn't help but roar with laughter. With a command in his heart, a speck of clear light flew out from between his brows, and it flew towards the 5-spirit white carp shuttle. This pair of old enemies were entangled once more. Hobaksu saw that this magic weapon could not do anything to Zhang Yan. He panicked. He was also a cunning old fox. He immediately thought of retreating. His body shook. A red smoke appeared around him. He escaped from the water element true light. He did not care about what happened to Lady Su. Without hesitation, he turned around and escaped. Madame Su was still struggling bitterly, but in the end, she could not escape from the water element true light. At this moment, she saw a large yellow hand reach out from the water curtain. With a sweep, it caught her by the waist. Madame Su was scared out of her wits and hurriedly said, "Please spare my life, fellow Taoist." After Zhang Yan formed his Dan, the mysterious yellow hand became even thicker. It was as if it was carved from a mountain rock. Hearing Lady Su's pleas for mercy, he did not have the heart to show mercy. With a thought, he pinched Lady Su to death. He looked up and saw Hobaksu fleeing into the distance. He smiled faintly and executed the minor universe teleportation. His figure flashed and arrived behind Hobaksu in the blink of an eye. Then he took out the golden palm and slapped it down. Hobaksu only felt the sound of wind behind him. Turning his head to look, he was so startled that he almost fell from the cloud. He shouted loudly, and his lower abdomen swelled up. With a hong sound, he opened his mouth and spat out a scarlet Dan Sha, which unexpectedly blocked the large Xian Huang hand. After he won this sliver of an opportunity to escape, his countenance became ghastly pale, and he was just about to circulate his cultivation technique to escape once more when something flashed before his eyes. The water element true light charged down once more, and how could he have the time to escape before instantly falling into it? Without someone controlling it, the 5-spirit white carp shuttle also became sluggish. The dot of clear light found a flaw and in a flash, it climbed onto the shuttle's back and firmly fixed it in the air. After a moment, the light on the shuttle dissipated and it stabilized. Zhang Yan kept the water element true light. With a wave of his hand, a white smoke flew up. He took it in front of him. Looking at this magic treasure, he could not help but smile. "I wanted that killer blade 100 times. I didn't want to take you, but you just had to deliver it to me. Isn't it predestined? Since you are in my hands, even if you belong to the Shao clan, I, Zhang Yan, dare to accept it." He laughed a few times, then rode the wind, broke through the atmosphere, and flew towards the south. Target equals, _blank. Chapter 262. Returning a rotten toad to a Ganoderma. Returning his disciple to the north. The place where Zhang Yan and Hibiko Higashi had agreed to meet again was in the southwest of the East Flower Continent, in a place called the Rotten Toad Mountain. This place was at the border of the kingdom of Liang, and further west was the Wildlands. This place was rarely visited, and the valley was shrouded in fog all year round. There were deep mountains and swamps everywhere, and snakes, pythons, poisonous insects, demons, and strange beasts were everywhere. Even cultivators rarely came here. After Zhang Yan rode the wind and circled around a few times, he was unwilling to go deeper. It seemed that in such a barren land, there might be demons hiding in seclusion. He landed on the southern side of the mountain that was facing the sun, and found a secluded valley. He casually opened up a cave that could accommodate several people, and with a shake of his sleeve, he threw the Ganoderma beauty to the ground. He then took out a pair of green flying leaves from his sleeve. This was the messenger talisman that Hibiko Higashi had given him. With a flick of his finger, one of the flying leaves turned into a green light and flew away. He placed the other green leaf on the Ganoderma beauty, then turned around and walked out of the cave. With another wave of his sleeve, he threw a few talismans onto the cave door. After hastily arranging it, he smiled faintly, unwilling to stay any longer, and flew into the sky. That day in Mount Chingsun, he met Hibiko Higashi as Li Yuanba. Now that he did not want his identity to be seen through, he naturally did not want to meet him. So he simply left the Ganoderma ancestor's body here, waiting for Hibiko Higashi to come and take it himself. Moreover, this person was a cultivator of the devil sect. The reason why he was willing to lower himself to negotiate with him was that the cultivation of the clone was the same as his, and it could not do anything to him, so he had no choice but to give in. But now that he was in the outside world, he had no scruples. It was not rare for him to turn hostile and attack, so Zhang Yan had no choice but to be on guard. Even if this person didn't have any enmity towards him, he didn't want to have anything to do with him. After all, their cultivations weren't on the same level, so anything he said would be useless. He walked for about half an hour before a hazy green light flashed across the sky. Along the way, the pine trees rustled and the green leaves fluttered. A woman in green with a beautiful face, red lips, and hazy hair flew through the air. She landed in front of the cave and glanced around, but she didn't see anyone. She couldn't help but sneer and say, "This junior sure runs fast." With a flick of her sleeves, she easily removed a few talismans and entered the cave. When she looked up, she saw the body of the Zoisha ancestor standing right in front of her. She couldn't help but be overjoyed as she muttered to herself, "This junior still keeps her promise." She then said coldly, "He Mulong Qingyao, the two of you actually dared to plot against me. Just you wait, when I get rid of the calamity and complete my cultivation, I'll definitely kill my way to Purple Bamboo Mountain and make you all restless." After Zhang Yan left the Rotten Toad Mountain, he didn't use the cloud to escape, but landed in a county in the country of Liang. He bought a boat at the ferry and floated along the river. He purposely slowed down his journey, enjoying the scenery of the southern country in the day and cultivating at night. He was quite carefree. 2 months later, the boat arrived at the city of Kangcheng County. He looked into the distance and Zhurong Mountain was already in sight. He smiled lightly and walked on the water. Not long after, he sensed the location of the formation flag of Zhu Yuaning stars. Smoke billowed and the waves parted as he dove into the underwater cave. Zhang Pan was sitting in the cave dwelling comprehending Tao when he suddenly felt a change in the formation, as if someone was passing through the cave dwelling without any delay. Instead of being shocked, he was overjoyed and quickly walked out to welcome the person. When he raised his head, he saw Zhang Yan standing in the air on a cloud of smoke. He was instantly excited and knelt down, saying, "Master has really returned." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Get up." He then looked around and asked, "Where's my disciple?" Zhang Pan answered honestly, "He's cultivating in the river." At this time, Madame Chen also heard the commotion and walked out from the depths of the cave. When she saw Zhang Yan, she was pleasantly surprised. She bowed and said happily, "So Taoist Zhang is back. Kun is also too. Instead of cultivating, he spends all his time playing in the water. This servant will call him over." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Madame Chen, don't be anxious. We can't disturb him when he's cultivating. It won't be too late to come out and see him when he's done." Madame Chen's words were also a test. Because she saw Tian Kun cultivating in the water every day, she always felt strange. It wasn't that she suspected there was something wrong with the cultivation method, but she was afraid that the child would fumble around on his own and cultivate on the wrong path. There was a set of rules and taboos in teaching a master and disciple. Although she was a mother, it wasn't appropriate for her to ask, but she was still a little uncertain. Now that she heard from Zhang Yan that it was indeed a proper cultivation method, she was relieved. Zhang Yan chatted with her for a while. Not long after, the water outside the cave rippled and Tian Kun walked out topless. He was now an 8-year-old child, but he was as tall and strong as a 13 or 14-year-old teenager. On his shoulders sat a palm-sized child who was very intimate with him. After he entered the door, he suddenly saw Zhang Yan and was startled. He quickly knelt on the ground and said fearfully, "I didn't know Master had arrived. Please accept a bow from your disciple." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Kun, get up." He then looked at the child and smiled, "How's the little companion I found for you?" Tian Kun looked at the child and answered, "Little fool is very good." Little fool? Zhang Yan couldn't help but laugh. This name was very straightforward. He nodded and said, "As long as you like him." Among the many pills he had left behind, there was a bottle that contained this little boy. He had kept this little boy because he knew that his disciple had never had a playmate since he was young, and he was afraid that his disciple would become a loner. Moreover, this little boy's true form was a solitary chi zoisha, and its spiritual energy was extremely pure, which was very beneficial to Tian Kuan's cultivation. At first, he was worried that this child was too playful and wouldn't want to stay here for long. Now, it seemed that the two of them were quite compatible. Zhang Yan turned to Madame Chen and said, "Madame Chen, today I'm going to take this child with me and return to the sect." A trace of joy flashed in Madame Chen's eyes, but a strong reluctance welled up in her heart. Biting her lower lip, she forced a smile and said, "Taoist priest is very kind. It is his good fortune to be able to become your disciple. If he is disobedient in any way, Taoist priest can scold him." Just then, Tian Kun suddenly said, "Master, I don't want to go anymore." Before Zhang Yan could say anything, Madame Chen's expression changed. She stood up abruptly and pointed at Tian Kun's nose. Her voice trembled, "Unfilial son, what did you say? Do you dare to say another word? Do you know how rare this opportunity is? Do you want to anger your mother to death?" Faced with his mother's scolding, Tian Kun knelt on the ground with a thud. His face was red, but he didn't say a word. Zhang Yan's expression didn't change. He asked, "Then let me ask you, why are you not willing?" Tian Kun raised his head and said loudly, "I've also asked the waiter. My disciple will follow Master to cultivate. He will be gone for tens or hundreds of years. If he leaves, who will take care of my mother?" Hearing this, Madame Chen looked at her son in a daze. Suddenly, her eyes turned red. She went forward and hugged Tian Kun in her arms. She sobbed, "Good boy, I'm happy that you're thinking of me. Be obedient and follow Master Immortal to cultivate. In the future, you'll be immortal and won't be shackled by the world of mortals. You won't have to suffer the hardships of mediocrity. That will be the greatest filial piety you can show to your mother." Tian Kun didn't say a word. His expression was stubborn. The little boy's face was full of confusion. He looked back and forth with his big black eyes. A hint of admiration appeared in Zhang Yan's eyes. He nodded and said, "Kun is right. Your mother endured the pain of being pregnant for 10 months and went through all kinds of hardships to bring you up. Your mother's kindness is greater than the heavens. You must repay her kindness. Although we are cultivators, we don't cut off our emotions and disregard human relationships. We won't let you suffer the pain of separation." After a pause, he said to Madame Chen, "Madame Chen, if your son enters my sect, you can follow me back to the sect. I wonder if you're willing? I can also go to Master Immortal?" Madame Chen couldn't believe it. Although she knew that she was going to visit immortals to seek Tao, she couldn't bear to part with her son. If there was a way that could satisfy both sides, she would be more than willing to do it. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "There are 9 big cities in Qinsong School and millions of people. Many of them are the family and friends of the disciples in the sect. Tian Kun is my disciple, Zhang Yan. Madam can come with him." Although there were tens of millions of ordinary people in the Donghua continent, only 1 in 1,000 had the potential to become a cultivator. The people who lived in the 9 cities of the Yingtsong sect were nourished by spiritual qi day and night, and their potential was far better than that of ordinary people. The disciples chosen by the master and his disciples were mostly chosen from the 9 cities. "Madam Chen, you can stay here for a few days. I will leave Zhang Pan here so that he can take care of you. When I return to the sect and settle Kun down, I will send someone to pick you up." Madam Chen was also excited. She quickly bowed and said, I thank you, Taoist. She then pulled Tian Kun over and scolded, Kun, your master has treated my family with great kindness. If you do anything to betray your master in the future, you are not my son. Seeing his mother speak so harshly, Tian Kun quickly knelt on the ground and agreed. Zhang Yan chuckled and said, Disciple, come with me today. With a wave of his sleeve, he and Tian Kun were wrapped up by a breeze and floated out of the cave. Tian Kun felt his vision blur. When he looked again, he realized that he had landed on a white cloud. The land below him was vast and boundless. The water was like white silk, and the mountains were undulating. Not only was he not afraid, but he curiously touched his left and right. He reached out to grab a ball of smoke, but it slipped through the gaps between his fingers. It was obviously an invisible object, but it just couldn't fall. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Disciple, sit tight. He activated his spell and flew north on the cloud. He didn't return to the sect directly, but flew unhurriedly to a place called Lonely Mountain. This was where Mr. Shi lived in seclusion. That day, he promised to bring his grandnephew into Xianmen, so he wouldn't go back on his word. 5 days later, he looked down and saw that the shape of the mountain matched Mr. Shi's description. He pressed down the cloud and to avoid shocking the world, the two landed in a dense forest. He held Tian Kun's hand and walked out of the forest. He saw a village not far away, and in front of him was a field with a muddy smell. On the ridge of the field, a few children were playing and chasing birds. This was the countryside, and the Tian family rarely had outsiders. When they saw Zhang Yan and Mr. Shi walking over, they all came forward to watch curiously. The group of children waved branches and chased after him, jumping and playing. Zhang Yan didn't mind. Children were pure and innocent. When they grew up, they would have to work hard to make a living and wouldn't be so carefree. They didn't walk far when they saw many people coming out from the village to welcome them. The leader was an old man who looked like a country gentleman. He walked forward with a walking stick and said with an excited expression, Are you the Taoist priest of Mai Palace? I've been waiting for a long time, and the immortal is finally here. Target equals _blank. Chapter 263. As the sun set, a young scholar hurried to the east of the village to visit Zhang Yan. Hearing that there was a Taoist from outside the village looking for him, he did not dare to be negligent even though he did not understand the reason. One must know that Taoists in Nanliang country were highly respected. If they came from a monastery, even the county magistrate would treat them with respect. After stepping into the hall, he saw the old clan leader of the village accompanying him. He hurriedly went up to greet him before coming to greet Zhang Yan. He bowed and said, This student is Shi Yansu. May I ask why Taoist wants to see me? Zhang Yan looked him up and down. He saw that his face was square, his eyes were bright, his forehead was high and wide, and he wore a scarf on his head. His scholarly robe was washed clean without a speck of dust. It was obvious that he had tidied himself up before coming here. Zhang Yan smiled and said, I was entrusted by Taoist Shi Changgang before he died to bring you into the celestial sect to cultivate Xian Shindao. Shi Changgang? Shi Yansua's face showed a blank expression. He could not be blamed for not knowing. It was already 100 years ago when Sir Shi left to seek Dao when he was young. There were very few women in the village who knew of him. Before entering Mount Qingxiun, Shi Gong knew that he did not have long to live, so he was homesick. After revisiting the old place, he discovered that Shi Yansuo had the aptitude to cultivate. Seeing that Shi Yansuo was alone in the world and had no parents to support, he had the idea of taking him to cultivate. At that time, he only discussed this matter with the clan leader and did not mention it to Shi Yansuo himself. The clan leader coughed and said, This Taoist priest is right. I also know about this matter. According to seniority, this old man is my uncle. He is very experienced in the Tao. This is definitely not wrong. Zhilang, the Taoist priest has also said that no one will force you on this matter. Whether you want to stay or leave, it's up to you. Shi Yansuo hesitated for a year before replying carefully, I got married 2 years ago. Now I have a wife and a concubine at home. I also have a pair of children to support. Although Taoist has good intentions, please forgive me for not being able to comply." After saying this, he bowed deeply. Zhang Yan didn't get angry. He just smiled and said, "If I is willing to get rid of that scourge for your village, are you willing to leave with I?" The old chief's white eyebrows twitched. He stood up, somewhat losing his composure. He widened his eyes and looked at Zhang Yan. "Can the Taoist priest help us get rid of this monster?" Half a year ago, there was a demon in the village. Some of the villagers' rice barns were emptied in one night, their livestock were eaten, and even their children went missing. At that time, the villagers invited the nearby Taoist priests to come and collect the demon, but none of them returned. After a few times, they gathered a lot of rice and went to invite the famous hemp palace 100 miles away to collect the demon. But the Taoist priests accepted the rice, but did not know when they would arrive. They just said, "Wait," and sent them away. This wait went on for several months. When they went to urge again, they were told that the Taoist priest who accepted the rice had long left and no one knew when he would return. At this time, the villagers no longer held any hope. But the demon became more and more rampant in this half a year, causing them to suffer unspeakably. Women from other villages didn't dare to marry into the village. When the villagers went out, everyone they saw would hide far away, afraid that they would be tainted with bad luck. If it wasn't for the fact that they didn't want to part with the land here, the villagers would have long left. Although the old chief had not seen Shi Yan use any Taoist techniques, this old man had lived for more than 100 years and was still healthy. He walked like he was flying. How could an ordinary Taoist compare? Therefore, he guessed that Zhang Yan also had some Taoist skills. When they were talking earlier, he had intentionally or unintentionally mentioned this matter. But Zhang Yan just smiled and didn't answer. Now that he suddenly heard that he had a relative, he admitted that he had the ability to get rid of the demon. Like a drowning man who found a life-saving straw, he didn't care whether he was telling the truth or not. He desperately used his eyes to signal Shi Yan Su'a, obviously wanting him to agree. Shi Yan Su'a immediately hesitated. He had a wife and beautiful concubines at home, and he also had children to enjoy. He really couldn't bear to leave. But he also knew that if the great danger in the village wasn't eliminated, he wouldn't be able to live on. He thought for a long time and suddenly raised his head to ask, "May I ask, Elder, if I go to that Taoist temple to cultivate, will I be able to return in the future?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "I only came to guide Taoist Shi to return a favor to a friend. This is your family's fortune and has nothing to do with I. After you go, if you want to return, naturally no one will come to stop you." The old chief watched anxiously. He tugged at his sparse beard and interrupted, "If that's the case, then Zhilang, you should agree. The matters in the village can't be delayed any longer. Your family's matters will be taken care of by the clan. It's not like you won't return." The old chief was a person of virtue and virtue. Once he said this, Shi Yan Su'a didn't dare to not agree. He stomped his feet and gritted his teeth, saying, "Fine, as long as Elder can eliminate this demon, I am willing to follow Elder." Zhang Yan nodded and smiled. "This matter is easy." He took out a few talisman from his sleeve and handed them to Tian Kun, saying, "Disciple, take this talisman and burn it in the 4 directions of the north, south, east, and west. Then bury it in the ground." Tian Kun was a 7 or 8-year-old child. He also had a playful heart. He immediately responded excitedly and ran out with the talisman. The old chief was puzzled. In the past, when Taoists came to eliminate demons, they would set up incense tables, offer offerings, burn talisman water, and gather the young and strong in the village. They would beat gongs and drums and shout in unison. They would take the black dog's blood and other filth and splash it everywhere. They had to make a ruckus. Zhang Yan's actions made him a little puzzled. After an hour, they suddenly heard a commotion outside. The old chief was startled. Just as he was about to send someone to find out what was going on, he suddenly heard a rumble. It was like a clap of thunder. The old chief and Shi Yan Su's eardrums were ringing and it took a while for them to calm down. At this moment, they seemed to vaguely hear many people shouting together, but they couldn't hear it clearly. Just as they were confused, the sound became louder and closer, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. A sturdy man rushed into the room and threw something he was carrying on his back to the ground. He shouted excitedly, "Uncle, this monster turned out to be a mouse that had turned into a spirit. It was hit by the drought thunder that the little Taoist buried just now, and now it's dead." The old chief stood up shakily and went forward to take a look. He saw that the dead mouse on the ground was as big as a calf. Its gray fur was like a steel brush. Its red and thin claws were curled up into a ball. Black blood seeped out of its 7 orifices. It could not be more dead. After looking for a long time, he suddenly thought of something and hurriedly turned around to say thanks. However, he was suddenly startled. It turned out that there was no one behind him. Zhang Yan and Shi Yansuo were long gone. Half a month later, Danyang Mountain, North Star Sect's Zhujiang Hut. In a beautiful pavilion, Elder Yan and Zhang Yan sat opposite each other. Beside them was a deep ravine that was as white as frost. Clouds would surge up from time to time, making people feel like they were on a cliff of glaciers. Elder Yan picked up the wine cup on the table and smiled. "Fellow Taoist has succeeded in condensing his core. This is really worthy of celebration. This old man will drink to fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan also picked up the jade cup and smiled. "Jinren Yan, I will also congratulate you here." After not seeing each other for 20 years, this elder Yan had also stepped into the Yuanying realm and could be called a Jinren. Originally, the Beichen sect had the support of this old man. If there were no major changes in these 1,000 years, they would be able to hold on without worry. However, the great disaster sword of Donghua continent was about to rise. Whether or not they could escape would depend on what this old man did in the future. Elder Yan finished the wine in his cup in one gulp. After putting it down, he cupped his hands and said, "My wife wrote a letter last year about the East Sea. I still have to thank fellow Taoist for saving me that day." When Zhang Yan heard him mention Lu Mainyang, he knew that this was undoubtedly telling him that the Lu siblings had already come out of seclusion. He nodded and smiled. "Shinren, there is no need to be so polite. Without your guidance, I would not have been able to find the 4 marquises' water that day." Elder Yan laughed. He waved his sleeve and pointed down the cliff, saying, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, look. The sun rises and the moon sets. Plants and trees wither and flourish. Everything has its ups and downs. This is the law of the world. You and I are not people who are willing to be mediocre. If we work together, we might be able to create a new world." If the Beichen sect wanted to survive the Great Disaster, they could only rely on a 10,000-year-old sect like the Qinsong school. Zhang Yan was undoubtedly the best way to build a relationship with the master and disciple of the Qinsong school. Back when Zhang Yan was still a mystic light realm cultivator, Elder Yan already had high hopes for him and had made the first move. Now that 20 years had passed, Zhang Yan had already succeeded in making medicine and pills. After returning to the sect, he would definitely be able to go one step further. Yan Jingting looked at Zhang Yan. He was sure that Zhang Yan would not refuse such good intentions. His own wife and brother-in-law wanted to borrow the abode of Heavenly Lake of Bright Nether to cultivate in order to break through to the next realm. This was undoubtedly a great debt of karma, and there was no stronger union of benefits than this. Zhang Yan naturally understood this. However, even if Elder Yan did not have this intention, he would still think of a way to use Lu Mainyang's hand to rope this old man in. He had a grotto heaven in his hands. This was undoubtedly very hated and envied by others. Even if he did not fight for the position of the top 10 disciples, someone would come knocking on his door sooner or later. However, this matter was not as simple as it seemed. After all, he still had to cultivate and cultivate in order to increase his realm. He could not do everything by himself. It had to be known that the top 10 disciples of Qinsong school all had the support of the sect behind them. If he wanted to move them, it was not as simple as defeating them on the surface. No matter if it was outside or inside the sect, he needed the help of allies. Elder Yan was an excellent choice. Now that the two of them were both on the rise, they could help each other. Thus, he only pondered for a moment before saying with a smile, "What enlightened master said is exactly what I wanted." Elder Yan relaxed. His eyes shone brightly as he solemnly raised his wine cup. Zhang Yan also raised his cup. The two of them faced each other from afar and drank the wine in their cups together. After putting down their wine cups, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. They naturally had a tacit understanding. Elder Yen stroked his beard and said with a smile, "I saw that the youth behind fellow Taoist just now had a strong foundation. Could he be fellow Taoist disciple?" Zhang Yen nodded his head and said, "That's right. This is my second disciple." Elder Yen sighed in admiration and said, "Fellow Taoist disciples are indeed impressive." Zhang Yen raised his eyebrows and said, "Reverend, you seem to be referring to something?" Elder Yen thought for a moment and said, "Fellow Taoist has a disciple named Lu Yenni?" Zhang Yen paused for a moment and said in a deep voice, "How did the name of my disciple enter the ears of enlightened master?" Elder Yen sighed, "Ever since fellow Taoist left, I have paid attention to the matters within Qinsong School. This disciple of yours is really not bad. I heard that she reached the mystic light realm 5 years ago, but without you as her master, she still suffered a lot." Zhang Yan's eyes turned cold, and the temperature on the ice cliff seemed to suddenly drop by a few degrees. Target equals, understood. Chapter 264. The sky was nearing dusk, and the evening sun hung over the mountains. The sunset glow was like a rose, decorating the clouds with a captivating red. 2 streaks of light came from the north in the sky. Lu Yenni formed a hand seal, and her ribbon fluttered in the wind as she flew first. Presently, she didn't possess the appearance of a little girl from all those years ago, and she was already elegant and beautiful. Her teeth were sharp, her eyes clear like autumn water, and she wore a plain white-colored feather dress. Moreover, she stood on a strand of clear light that rippled beneath her feet, causing her to seem like an otherworldly lotus. The woman beside her was called Qiu Hanyue. This woman was also very pretty. Her hair was like the clouds, and her waist was thin like a willow. Her beautiful eyes were lively, and the mysterious light under her feet was alternating between red and orange. It was dazzling. When she flew over, her voice was like a silver bell, and she talked non-stop. It was obvious that she was a lively and active person. Lu Yenni was gentle and didn't talk much. She just smiled and listened. In reality, she was very happy. She and Qiu Hanyue had worked together and spent a lot of effort to kill a ferocious scarlet serpent at the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. When they returned to the merit courtyard, they would definitely get a small merit. Although Qinsong School had chased away the 3 lakes of Yao, due to the turmoil of the water country, the Yao tribes kept attacking each other. Yao cultivators that escaped to the south often came here to take over the mountains and rivers, so the sect sent out many disciples to go out and fight. Being a mystic light realm disciple, Lu Yenni naturally couldn't shirk this responsibility. She was ordered by the sect to go out. However, the Yao serpent was extremely ferocious, and fighting it was truly frightening. If she wasn't careful, she would die on the spot. Luckily, Zhou Chongju had given her the golden bell of warding disaster, which flew out at the critical moment to protect her. That was why she was able to survive. However, after the fierce battle, this treasure was slightly damaged and needed to be refined again before it could be used again. She had a faint smile on her face. She first saw a 1,000-gem jade ring in the merit courtyard, and this treasure could only be exchanged for by doing a great merit for the sect. In Qinsong School, 15 small merits were equivalent to a great merit. As of now, she had already accumulated 14 small merits. After killing this scarlet dragon this time, she just so happened to reach 15. If she could get the help of this magic treasure, she would have the confidence to go to the condensation pond in the extreme north and see if she could find an immortal fate. At this time, Qiu Hanyue raised her slender hand, pointed forward, and cried out excitedly, "Senior apprentice Sister Lu, that's clear nether heavenly lake in front. Little sister must stay in big sister's immortal's cave for a period of time and soak in the spiritual energy." Lu Yenni pursed her lips into a smile and said, "All right, it's all thanks to younger sister Hanyue's help this time. I have to properly entertain you." Qiu Hanyue looked at the giant shadow of Zhaoyu Mountain and said with admiration, "Big sister is so lucky. With this blessed land, your cultivation will definitely increase by leaps and bounds. Thinking about how Big Sister only used 15 years to break through to the mystic light realm, there aren't many people in the same generation that can compare to you. This little sister is very envious. Lu Yinyi shook her head lightly and said, "This is just the legacy of Master, but it has caused many people to be dissatisfied and jealous." Qiu Hanyue's eyes turned, and she pouted and said, those people claim to be from the same sect, but they don't dare to find martial Uncle Zhang, so they always come to make things difficult for Big Sister." Back then, the 6 rivers and 4 islands had the biggest conflict with Zhang Yan. More than 10 disciples had been killed by him, and even their own sects had been trampled on. The disciples of these 10 families were often ridiculed by the big families, and they always felt that they couldn't raise their heads. However, Zhang Yan had left the sect to search for medicine, and Zhou Chongju wasn't someone they could offend, so they had nowhere to vent their anger. Later, they heard that Zhang Yan had a female disciple, so they often came to make trouble for Lu Yinyi, intentionally or unintentionally. However, Lu Yinyi was smart, got along well with her fellow disciples, and had a good relationship with Immortal Peng's disciple, Qin Nan, so she had never really suffered any losses. However, after all, she did not have a master to look after her. Although Zhou Chongju was her master in name, he would at most give her a few pointers on cultivation. He would only treat these actions as training for her. Therefore, unless it was a matter of life and death, he would definitely not stand up for her. Therefore, these people had a lot less scruples, and they would come to pick a fight every few days. Qiu Hanyue blinked and said, "When Martial Uncle Zhang comes back, no one will dare to bully Big Sister anymore." 19 years ago, Zhang Yan fought against 100 Xian Light Realm cultivators alone in the outer Endless Sea. Not only was he not at a disadvantage, but he also defeated them. When this matter was spread back to the sect, it caused many disciples to worship him with passion, and they were fascinated. Even Qiu Hanyue admired him very much. Lu Yinyi looked at the fiery clouds in front of her and thought to herself, "It has been more than 20 years since Master went out to find medicine. I wonder how he is now." Just as she was lost in thought, 2 rays of light came from the east with ill intent, and in the blink of an eye, they landed in front of the 2 of them. There were 2 young cultivators standing in front of them, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left had a sinister expression, and the mysterious light on his body was like fire, constantly jumping around. The one on the right was wearing the deacon robes of the Upright Purity Courtyard, and his eyes were looking at Lu Yinyi with interest. Qiu Hanyue wrinkled her nose and shouted at the young cultivator on the left with the fire pattern, "Wan Zhang, why is it you again?" Wan Zhang ignored her and only stared at Lu Yinyi. His face twitched, and he pointed at the cultivator beside him and said, "Lu Yinyi, I am not the one looking for you this time. The one looking for you is senior brother Wen Anwen of the Upright Purity Courtyard." Lu Yinyi's gaze shifted to that person, and she said quietly, "Why is senior brother Wen looking for junior sister?" Wen chuckled and pointed at Wan Zhang, saying, "A few days ago, a disciple of the Wan clan died in the wilderness. Someone saw him and he had a dispute with junior sister Lu. This matter is difficult to resolve, so I can only invite junior sister to the Upright Purity Courtyard." Lu Yinyi was intelligent by nature, and when she heard this, she knew that it was clearly the same as last time, but this time, he was a bit more clever and found a grand excuse. Naturally, she could not go with him, so she shook her head and said, "Junior sister, I did not do such a thing, and senior brother Wen's words are unreasonable. Forgive me, junior sister, for not being able to comply." Wen said indifferently, "Whether or not you did it is not something that can be determined by words. Follow me back to the Upright Purity Courtyard. If junior sister really did not do it, I will naturally give you justice." Qiu Hanyue shouted angrily, "I have been with senior sister Lu for the past few days, and I have never seen any Wan clan disciples. It is clearly you who are falsely accusing the good people." Wen was not angry, and only smiled, saying, "Then you might not be able to escape responsibility. The crime of killing a fellow disciple is not a small one. If you still retaliate and you die or get injured, then don't blame me for being merciless. You should think about it carefully." These words were very threatening, and it was clear that he was using his power to oppress others. Qiu Hanyue was very angry, but Lu Yinyi was calm as usual and said unhurriedly, "What senior brother said is only your side of the story, and it is not fair. If you can ask the masters to step in, junior sister is willing to go to the upright purity courtyard." Wan Zhang, who had not spoken for a long time, suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed. He said, "Lu Yinyi, don't count on Monastery Head Zhou. You probably don't know this, but Monastery Head Zhou was invited by Mengzhen to refine pills a few days ago. In less than 2 months, he has no time to pay attention to you." Lu Yinyi's heart shook, and her mind worked very quickly. She immediately realized that this matter was different from the past. It was not a hasty move, but they had made thorough preparations beforehand. Perhaps her going out to kill the dragon had something to do with them. This could very well be the greatest danger she had ever faced since she entered the Tao. She did not panic in the face of danger, and thought to herself, "These two people's cultivation is higher than ours, and they are so fearless. They must have a backup plan. The person they are looking for is me, but if Sister Hanyue can find an opportunity to escape and find Martial Aunt Qinan to uphold justice, then even if I am captured, I can still make these two people fear me." In just a moment, she made up her mind, and said to Qiu Hanyue in a low voice, "These two people are looking for me. Sister, find an opportunity to leave later." Before she could finish, Qiu Hanyue hurriedly said, "Sister, do you think I am someone who is afraid of death? I am not leaving." Wan Zhang said coldly, "Leave? Where do you think you are going? Let me tell you the truth. None of you can leave today." Lu Yinyi sighed softly. Although she had a good plan, she was helpless against her junior sister's stubborn temper. This plan would probably not work. Since that was the case, she would just have to throw everything aside and fight with all her might. Qiu Hanyue said angrily, "Wan Zhang, Martial Aunt Zhang destroyed your 6 rivers and 4 islands back then. Why don't you dare to seek revenge, but come to bully his disciple? You are a despicable person. When Martial Aunt Zhang returns, she will definitely not let you off." Wan Zhang's face twitched, and he said with a gloomy face, "Zhang Yan. I will settle the score with him sooner or later, but now I have to deal with his disciple first." That day, his arm was cut off by Zhang Yan, and because it fell on the Spirit Page Island, he could not find it back. The body of a cultivator was a treasured raft that carried the Tao, and it could not be damaged. Although he had borrowed an arm from his brother who could not cultivate, he had been chased by Zhang Yan like a stray dog that day. It was the greatest humiliation of his life, and all he wanted was revenge. He had once learned a technique that allowed him to take the primordial yin of a female cultivator to aid his own cultivation, and Lu Yinyi was his target. If he could take Zhang Yan's disciple as a concubine, it would naturally be the greatest humiliation to him. Moreover, he had thought about this plan carefully. Just now, he thought that after Zhang Yan returned, if he wanted to seek justice, he had all kinds of backup plans waiting for him. Wan Zhang snorted coldly and said no more. He waved his sleeve, and in an instant, a flaming light that looked like a shooting star sprayed out from his palm. He then pressed it down fiercely, and this dazzling light, like a firework, fell toward Lu Yinyi's head. Lu Yinyi's expression was calm, and with a light wave of her hand, there was this clear, profound light that welcomed it. This profound light was endless, as clear and soft as water, like a lotus leaf that rippled and floated. Although it was suppressed by the profound light that was like a star, it did not collapse. The cultivation method that she was practicing was the 3 elements of tranquility that Zhou Changju had found for her. It was also a top-notch profound cultivation method. Originally, the Zhou clan's technique was also good, but Zhou Changju did not teach it, because this technique had many harsh conditions. Without the Zhou clan's support, it was impossible to cultivate to a profound level. And this tri-essence of peace, although there was nothing special about it, it paid special attention to polishing one's foundation. Step by step, it was also very tough, and it had endless power. It was extremely suitable for a long battle. Wan Zhang saw that when Lu Yinyi moved, her body was graceful, soft and beautiful, and his eyes burned with passion. However, no matter how hard he tried, He could not break through that layer of profound light that was like floating water. When he made his move, and also made his move at the same time, he stretched out a finger and a golden light shot out. It was like a living creature, twisting and moving gracefully in the air. Qiu Hanyue cried out in surprise and was forced to dodge left and right. She actually could not free her hand to take out her magic treasure, and in an instant, she was at a disadvantage. Wen seemed to be just teasing her and was not in a hurry to make his move. Instead, he said with a smile, "Senior Brother Wan, this Lu Yeni cultivates the tri-essence of light. You won't be able to take her down in a short period of time. Don't hold back and end the battle quickly." Wan Zhang snorted and took a step back. He then took out a small three-legged cauldron from his sleeve and held it in his palm. He chanted a spell and a white light flew out, heading straight for Lu Yeni. Target equals _blank. Chapter 265. This white light was extremely fast, and in a flash, it was already in front of her. Read Hun after me, Hun. Remember, please. Lu Yeni saw that she couldn't dodge it, so in a hurry, she raised her hand and took out a jade bracelet. She used it to block the white light, and only then did she see that the white light was actually a thumb-sized bird. It had red eyes, yellow claws, white feathers, and a steel beak. With just a peck on the jade bracelet, the bracelet shattered. Taking this moment to catch her breath, she quickly retreated, and the hem of her dress fluttered. In an instant, she was a distance away from the white-feathered bird. Wan Zhang sneered and shouted, "Lu Yeni, don't take out your broken magic tools to show off." Lu Yeni frowned slightly. The vestments and magic tools she wore were exchanged with hard work using her merits, and each one of them wasn't easy to obtain. If it wasn't for the golden bell of refuge given to her by Zhou Changju that was already damaged, she wouldn't have to use this magic tool to block it. Wan Zhang held the small cauldron in his hand and made another incantation gesture. The white-feathered bird chirped and flapped its wings, turning into a ray of light and flying over like a white line. Lu Yeni retreated. At this moment, she didn't have any magic tool to protect her, so she could only forcefully raise her profound light and set up layers of shield-like light curtains to block the attack. However, this move was futile. The profound light in front of the white-feathered bird was like a thin piece of paper, and she had no choice but to step on the clouds and quickly retreat. Riding the flying light in the air, she kept changing her position in the air to avoid the sharp edge. Wan Zhang saw that he had the situation under control, so he was no longer in a hurry to kill Lu Yeni. Instead, he ordered the white-feathered bird to peck at the profound light in front of her. The bird bit left and pecked right, and everywhere it passed, the profound light was shattered and turned into essence that dissipated, never to be condensed again. At this moment, Lu Yeni finally understood the power of this bird. Not only could it injure and destroy the enemy like a sharp arrow, it could also slowly force the enemy into a desperate situation like a soft knife. She hurriedly operated the spiritual aura in her sea of qi and forced out a mouthful of profound light again, barely managing to maintain the situation. But this was no different from quenching one's thirst with poison. She immediately guessed in her heart that they clearly intended to capture her alive. Once the vital energy in her body was exhausted, she could only wait to be captured without putting up a fight. However, she had reached the mystic light realm 5 years ago, and she had experienced many life and death situations thanks to these people. She wasn't panicking, and she controlled her mystic light to block left and right as she faced the enemy calmly. She didn't relax at all as she tried to think of a countermeasure. But this white-feathered sparrow was truly extraordinarily formidable, and under the flurry of pecks, even if her true power was long and lasting, she was gradually unable to hold on any longer. At this moment, she still hadn't given up in her heart, and she was secretly bitterly thinking of a way out. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and she said in her heart, "How could I have forgotten about that thing?" She shouted and exerted all her strength to send out a ray of mysterious light to stop the bird. At the same time, she raised her hand and took out a talisman. She chanted a technique and sent the talisman into the sky. It turned into a ray of light and flew away. This talisman was given to her by Luo Xiao. If she wasn't far from the bright nether heavenly lake, she only needed to send it out in a moment of danger, and she would come to her rescue in time. Because Luo Xiao was a beast cultivator, it wasn't convenient for her to move around freely in the territory of Qinsong School. Adding on the fact that Lu Yenyi had never been in such a dangerous situation before, she didn't think of it in time. Wen En was teasing Qiu Hanyue, and he raised his head to look in the direction that the talisman flew to. He smiled and said, "Could it be flying to the bright nether heavenly lake? Senior Marshal Brother Wan, could this junior martial sister Lu call for reinforcements?" Wan Zhang also laughed when he saw this. The bright nether heavenly lake is very close to this place. Zhang Yan must have set something up beforehand. Wen En pretended to be enlightened and said, "No wonder Junior Marshal Brother Wan ordered the Junior Marshal Brothers to guard that place. So you already knew that there would be such a place. You really did think it through." Wan Zhang was also very proud of himself. He had set up this chess piece casually, and he didn't think that it would have such a miraculous effect. When Lu Yenyi heard this, her heart sank slightly. She sighed and said, "Forget it. Even if I die, I can't fall into the hands of such a person. I don't want to taint my master's name." She had already made up her mind. After resisting for a while, she would make an appearance that she couldn't hold on any longer, luring Wan Zhang to come and capture her. Then she would use all the true power in her body to fight. Even if she couldn't kill him, she would at least heavily injure him. On the other side, Wen En had been fighting for so long. Seeing that Qiu Hanyue couldn't fight back at all under his attack, he had already lost interest. He simply pointed with his finger, and the golden light suddenly sped up a bit, touching Qiu Hanyue's body. The latter cried out in alarm and fell down from the clouds. Wen En chuckled softly. He stepped forward and grabbed her with his hand. He closed the Qi gate and casually threw her onto the profound light beneath his feet. He then turned around and shouted, "Junior Marshal Brother Wan, why are you still dawdling?" When Wan Zhang heard his question, he cursed in his heart. However, he had no choice but to speed up his actions. He urged the white bird to peck a few more times, forcing Lu Yenyi to retreat step by step. When the last piece of profound light was torn away, her body was already on the verge of collapse, as if she could fall from the sky at any time. No matter who looked at it, she didn't have much strength to resist. Although Qiu Hanyue was caught in Wen An's hands, she could still see the situation clearly. Seeing this, she said anxiously, "Wan Zhang, if you dare to hurt Sister Lu, I will definitely not let you off. My master and martial uncle Zhang will not let you off either." Wan Zhang laughed loudly and said, "All right then. I'll first cripple her cultivation. Let's see who can stop me." However, at this moment, he heard a faint voice ring in his ears. "Is that so? I'd like to see who dares to touch my disciple." Wan Zhang's expression suddenly changed. His entire body trembled, and he almost couldn't hold the small cauldron in his hand. Looking back in disbelief, he saw a black-robed and handsome Taoist standing in the clouds with his hands behind his back. His eyes were filled with biting cold intent. As soon as he met that murderous gaze, he only felt a boom in his mind. He didn't know why, but he recalled the other party's ferocious appearance when he killed his way through the 6 rivers and 4 islands. He couldn't help but feel his limbs go weak and his tongue was tied. He said in panic, "Tinglong." Lu Yenyi was also stunned. She suspected that she was in a dream. She couldn't help but feel surprised and happy at the same time. She said with a trembling voice, "Master?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly at her and gave her a praising look. Then, he glanced at Wen En and Wan Zhang and said coldly, "Since the two of you dare to come and bully my, Zhang Yan's, disciple, then leave your lives here." Wen En was originally indifferent, but after seeing Zhang Yan, his expression became serious. It was because Zhang Yan's fame was too great. Although he was only at the first level of the mystic light realm when he left the sect, he didn't even notice when he got close to him. It was obvious that his cultivation was much deeper than before, so he had to be careful. He was Fang Hong's disciple. Because Zhang Yan didn't want to accuse Gu Shura, Fang Hong couldn't escape the punishment of the sect. He had been bullied for a few years for nothing. The pills, techniques, artifacts, and spiritual lands in the sect were limited. Without his master to look after him, the piece that originally belonged to him was taken away by someone else. Because of this, his cultivation was affected, and he naturally hated Zhang Yan. Now that he had a chance to take revenge, he knew that Wan Zhang was from an aristocratic family and wasn't on the same side as him, but he didn't hesitate to cooperate with him. Wan An's fingers trembled slightly. He took a deep breath and said harshly, "You are Zhang Yan? What an arrogant tone. Let me, Wan An, have a taste of you." He let out a loud shout and pointed his finger. He actually released a few dozen dazzling rays of golden light in one go. When they flew into the air, they were illuminated by the afterglow of the setting sun, and they were actually plated with a layer of bloody splendor. When he was fighting Qiu Hanyue earlier, he only used one golden light to force the latter to retreat. Now that he released dozens of golden lights, it was obvious that he used all his strength in one breath. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. He took a step forward and actually walked past the layers of light. In the blink of an eye, he arrived in front of Wan An. He then pointed his finger at Wan An's forehead and a green light entered his fingertip. Wan An felt as if he was struck by lightning. His entire body trembled and he froze on the spot. He only heard Zhang Yan say indifferently, "You are not qualified." Wan An's eyes were filled with fear. He said with a trembling voice, You are already." Before he finished speaking, his entire body exploded into a cloud of blood mist. When Wan Zhang saw that Zhang Yan killed Wan An so easily, he couldn't help but be terrified. The trace of hope that he still had was completely destroyed. He no longer had any fighting spirit. With a shout, he urged the small cauldron in his hand to attack with all his might. He didn't dare to see what the result would be, so he turned around and fled. Light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed, and with a flick of his finger, a drop of serene heavy water flew out and directly smashed into the white-feathered sparrow, turning it into minced meat. That drop of serene heavy water didn't lose its momentum and went straight for Wan Zhang's back. With a pop sound, it poured into the back of Wan Zhang's head and flew out from his forehead. Wan Zhang didn't even make a sound before he died and fell to the ground. With a wave of his hand, Zhang Yan sucked Wan Zhang's soul over and threw it into his sleeve. Then, he turned his gaze to the two girls. Lu Yenny hurriedly pulled Qiu Hanyue up to greet him. She lowered her head and said, "Disciple Lu Yenny greets master." She knelt down and respectfully kowtowed 3 times. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, Disciple doesn't need to be so courteous. Yenny, I also know that you've suffered a lot over the years. You've suffered on behalf of master. Today, when master returns to the mountain gate, I'll see who dares to bully you." Even though Lu Yenny had a strong temperament, she was a girl after all. Hearing this, her eyes also turned slightly red. She choked and said, "Disciple is useless and has troubled master." Qiu Hanyue looked at Zhang Yan with some fear and admiration. She thought to herself, "I heard that this Uncle Master Zhang broke the enemy's formation and was rewarded with the heavenly lake of bright nether seclusion. After that, he went out to look for medicine. Now that more than 20 years have passed, he must be returning to the mountain gate to refine medicine and condense his core." Condensing a core was a major event. Even someone as talented as Ning Chongxian had to return to the mountain gate to form his core. Therefore, she guessed that this Uncle Master Zhang had already prepared all the medicinal pills and was just missing the last step. At this moment, she saw Zhang Yan looking at her. She hurriedly came up and greeted him with the etiquette of a junior. "Martial niece Qiu Hanyue greets Uncle Master Zhang." Zhang Yan looked her up and down and smiled. "Whose disciple are you?" Qiu Hanyue stole a glance at Lu Yenny and said with some embarrassment, "My master, Fan Chongqing." "So your senior brother Fan's brilliant disciple." Zhang Yan's heart turned, and he immediately understood Fan Chongqing's intention. He was secretly taking care of Lu Yenny, and in turn, expressing goodwill to him. Just like just now, if Lu Yenny had been kidnapped and Qiu Hanyue had been taken, then Fan Chongqing would have an excuse to intervene in this matter. At least, he could protect the two of them. This was done quietly, but he was secretly flattering him. This was indeed Fan Changqing's style of doing things. Lu Yenyi looked at her good friend in surprise. She couldn't help but complain, "Younger sister is Uncle Master Fan's disciple. You've been hiding it from me for a long time." Since it was revealed, Qiu Hanyue let it go. She giggled and blinked. "You've never asked about it." Lu Yenyi looked at her reproachfully, but she could only shake her head helplessly. Qiu Hanyue's cultivation was not high, and she did not take the initiative to mention her sect. Lu Yenyi only thought that this junior sister had her own difficulties, so she never asked. She never thought that Qiu Hanyue's background was extraordinary. As the two were talking, Zhang Yan suddenly frowned. He looked up into the sky and said in a low voice, "The two of you, stand behind me. Target equals, _blank." Chapter 266. Reputation remains. The remaining power is oppressive. The clouds in the sky parted and 6 figures appeared. The one in the lead was a middle-aged Taoist with broad bones and a fat body. His face was like a full moon, and his robes were as large as the mouth of a bag. They flapped in the wind, and there was a cloud of smoke under his feet. There was a faint murderous aura around him, and it was obvious that he was a core transformation cultivator. However, from the Taoist robes and accessories on his body, it was clear that this group of people were disciples of the True Clarity Courtyard. Zhang Yan's face was expressionless, but Lu Yenyi and Qiu Hanyue were both shocked. One had just died, and now there were disciples of the True Clarity Courtyard coming. No matter how they looked at it, they didn't have good intentions, so the two of them were secretly on guard. Lu Yenyi was even more worried. One of the opponents was a core transformation cultivator. If a conflict broke out, would her master be able to withstand it? Wenden was an official deacon of the Zhengqin courtyard. People like him were worshipped in the offering hall of the Zhengqin courtyard. Once he died, the flame of the candle would be extinguished, and the person on duty in the courtyard would know immediately. The 6 people who had hurried over from Heavenly Prisoner Peak all had grave expressions. Whoever dared to kill a deacon of the True Clarity Courtyard outside the gates of Qinsong School was definitely not someone easy to deal with. There was bound to be a fierce battle. The middle-aged Taoist looked down and saw Zhang Yan at first glance. He squinted his eyes at first, then a subtle smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and he slowly pressed down on the cloud. Unexpectedly, he was not in a hurry to attack. Instead, he stepped forward and laughed loudly. "Junior Zhang, when I heard that you left the mountain in search of medicine, I didn't have the time to send you off. Now that I think about it, it has been over 20 years since we last met." When Zhang Yan saw this person, he also smiled and bowed. "So it's Vice-Chancellor Pan. That year, we parted in a hurry at the True Clarity Courtyard. I didn't think we would meet here again today." The disciples behind Assistant Monastery Head Pan were originally only waiting for him to give the order to attack, but seeing the two of them suddenly greet each other as if they were rather familiar with each other, they were stunned for a moment and looked at each other in dismay. Assistant Monastery Head Pan carefully looked at Zhang Yan and said meaningfully, "It seems that junior brother Zhang has had some fortuitous encounters these past few years." Lu Yenyi and Qiu Hanyue couldn't see through Zhang Yan's cultivation because their cultivation was shallow, but he couldn't hide it from Vice-Chancellor Pan, who was also a core formation cultivator. Zhang Yan just smiled and said nothing. Assistant Monastery Head Pan didn't seem to mind. With a chuckle, he pointed at Zhang Yan and said to the True Purity Courtyard disciples behind him, "Aren't you all extremely impressed by the senior apprentice brother Zhang who destroyed the 4 beasts formation and defeated 100 people with 1 sword? Here, this is him." What? As soon as these words were said, a wave of exclamations rang out. The gazes that these disciples looked at Zhang Yan immediately changed, and someone even said in a low voice, "So it's senior apprentice brother Zhang." Most of the disciples in the True Purity Courtyard were of the same master and disciple lineage, and they all had a favorable impression of Zhang Yan, who had ruthlessly shredded the aristocratic family's faces that day. There were those who worshipped him and those who admired him even more. Now that he was standing in front of them, these people all faintly revealed expressions of curiosity and admiration. Vice-Chancellor Pan exchanged a few more words with Zhang Yan, then casually mentioned, I just discovered that Attendant Wenan's soul essence had disappeared and followed the jade talisman on his body all the way here. Does junior apprentice brother Zhang know of his whereabouts? Zhang Yan faintly smiled and said as if he didn't care. This Wenan was even rude and wanted to humiliate my disciple, so I casually killed him. He said this so casually, as if Wenan was just an insignificant chicken or dog on the side of the road. Even if the disciples had a favorable impression of him, their expressions changed slightly. Vice-Chancellor Pan didn't seem surprised by this and instead laughed, saying, "If that's the case, then don't blame junior apprentice brother Zhang." Zhang Yan also took a deep look at this person. This matter wasn't going to end peacefully. After all, Zhuang Bufan was the Vice-Chancellor of the True Purity Courtyard. If it had been this person instead of Vice-Chancellor Pan, Zhang Yan would have been prepared to clash with him. Vice-Chancellor Pan didn't have any friendship with him, and at most they could only be said to be acquaintances nodding their heads. Why would he make such an obvious move to help him? Among the disciples of the Yingtsong sect, those who could cultivate to the core transformation realm were not easy to deal with. Since the other party could become the vice-headmaster of the Zhengqing courtyard, he could not be underestimated. There must be a deeper meaning behind his actions. The two of them were like old friends who hadn't seen each other for many years. After chatting for a while, they bid their farewells to each other. Before they left, Vice-Chancellor Pan suddenly said in a low voice, "It's all thanks to junior apprentice brother Ji's matter back then." As soon as he finished speaking, he gave Zhang Yan a kind smile before flying away with his subordinates. Hearing this, Zhang Yan immediately understood. He had unintentionally accused Gushua back then. Although he had offended some people, he had also sowed good karma. After Vice-Chancellor Pan bid farewell to Zhang Yan, he flew back to the True Purity Courtyard, but his eyes constantly flickered. He didn't want to clash with Zhang Yan today, not just because Zhang Yan had helped Gushua back then. It was because he saw that Zhang Yan was now a core transformation cultivator and also had the status of a true disciple. If they fought, he might not be able to gain the upper hand. Not to mention that Wenan was Fang Hong's disciple, and he wasn't on good terms with him. So why should he stand up for Wenan? Moreover, Vice-Chancellor Pan still remembered how Zhang Yan had cut off an arm of Zhuang Bufan's disciple and thrown him in front of the True Purity Courtyard. It had seemed like he had acted fiercely and disregarded the consequences, but in the end, not only had nothing happened to him, he had almost caused Zhuang Bufan to lose his position as Vice-Chancellor of the True Purity Courtyard. This was clearly a plan before taking action. After this incident, he didn't dare to underestimate Zhang Yan anymore. And today, Zhang Yan had directly killed when Vice-Chancellor Pan definitely didn't believe that it was just a moment of impulse. Perhaps Zhang Yan had already prepared a pit for others to jump into. He absolutely didn't want to step into this pool of muddy water. For the past 20 years, he had been bitterly suppressed by Zhuang Bufan and couldn't move at all. Much of his power had also been taken away from him. This time, when Zhang Yan returned, he felt that a good show was about to begin. The sect that had been peaceful for many years after the three pools was annihilated was about to set off another wave. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but gloat in his heart. What does this have to do with me? I'll leave it for Zhuang Bufan and Fang Hong to worry about. After watching Vice-Chancellor Pan leave, Zhang Yan smiled at Lu Yenny and said, "Disciple, this time I went out, I took in another disciple. From now on, you will be the eldest senior sister. Just now, I saw that you were in danger, so I put him down and rushed over alone. Your junior brother's cultivation is still low and he can't fly yet, so I need to go fetch him." Lu Yenny said seriously, "Master, if there's anything I can do, how can I trouble you with such a small matter? I will go fetch my junior brother myself." Qiu Hanyue rolled her eyes and went forward to grab Lu Yenny's sleeve. "Sister, I'll go with you." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Then they flew away. Looking at the two of them, Zhang Yan nodded in his heart. It was good to have a smart and understanding disciple. He didn't need to say much and she knew what to do. For example, Zhang Pan was just a servant boy. He didn't need to think too much. It didn't matter if he was stiff or stupid, as long as he could order him around. As a disciple, he needed to find someone with both talent and intelligence. In the future, as his status and cultivation increased, there would be some things that he didn't need to do personally. As long as he took care of them, there would be a disciple to do it for him. Like the 10 disciples of Chinsong school, it was impossible for them to be at the forefront all day. At their level, most of the time, they only needed to focus on cultivation. All the hard work was done by others. If there were no such benefits, why would they spend so much effort to fight for this position? But a moment later, Lu Yinyi and Qiu Hanyue flew over, holding Tian Kuan's hand. Hearing Tian Kuan calling her senior sister so intimately, Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You two are brother and sister. If you have anything to say, you can talk about it after we return to the cave." He looked at Qiu Hanyue again and said, "Martial niece Qiu, why don't you come along?" Qiu Hanyue had long wanted to see what the heavenly lake of clear nether looked like. Although Lu Yinyi had promised to bring her into this place, now that Zhang Yan had returned, she couldn't make the decision. She was just thinking about what reason to follow him. Hearing Zhang Yan's personal invitation, she was naturally delighted and said excitedly, "Yes, martial uncle." Zhang Yan laughed and waved his sleeve. These people only felt their bodies lighten, and they were swept up by a cool breeze, heading straight for the heavenly lake of clear nether. However, not long after they moved forward, they saw a few people fighting in the clouds in the distance. Zhang Yang's eyes were sharp, and he immediately saw an enchanting figure in the middle. It was Luo Xiao. There were 3 people surrounding her and fighting nonstop, while the other 2 were standing in the distance and pointing. One of them shouted, "Kill this demon girl, and we will be able to record another merit." The 5 of them were originally invited by Wan Zhang to block the exit of the heavenly lake of clear nether. After Luo Xiao received Lu Yinyi's talisman, she rushed out of the mansion to help, but she was stopped by them. After discovering that she was a demon cultivator, one of them had the thought of killing her. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. He took a step forward and appeared in front of these people. Before the 3 people who were besieging Luo Xiao could react, Zhang Yan's shoulder shook, and a watercolored light flashed behind him. Then, these 3 people disappeared without a trace. Luo Xiao suddenly saw a flash of brilliance in front of her, and the people she was fighting with disappeared. She was surprised, and when she looked up, she couldn't help but cry out in surprise, "Master!" Zhang Yan stood in the clouds and put his sleeves behind his back. He said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Luo, how have you been?" Luo Xiao's beautiful eyes flickered, and she looked closely at Zhang Yan. She suddenly covered her red lips with her hand, and her eyes couldn't help but reveal a look of joy. She was now a cultivator of the 3rd level of the mystic light realm, and she had reached the refinement stage. She was also connected to Zhang Yan through a blood oath, so she could naturally see through Zhang Yan's current cultivation. The other 2 people standing on the side were surprised when they saw Zhang Yan take away their companion in the blink of an eye, and he was talking about old times as if there was no one else around. A cultivator in green robes with narrow eyes mustered up the courage to walk up and ask, "Who are you, sir? Why did you take them away for no reason?" Zhang Yan glanced at the 2 of them and said, "I'm Zhang Yan. Go back and tell the masters of these 3 that if they want to find someone, tell them to come and find me personally. If they don't come in 3 days, then they don't have to come." The 2 of them couldn't help but take in a cold breath when they heard the person in front of them call himself Zhang Yan. The cultivator with narrow eyes cupped his hands and said carefully, "So it's Martial Uncle Zhang. We will go back and tell them everything Martial Uncle said." After saying that, the 2 of them didn't dare to stay any longer and left in a panic. Qiu Hanyue's eyes lit up. Zhang Yan's might from when he destroyed the 6 rivers and 4 islands was still there. Now that he had returned, he was able to scare these people away just by showing off a bit of his power. It was very impressive in her eyes. Luo Xiao's eyes turned, and she went up to hold Lu Yinyi's hand. She smiled sweetly and said, "Is Yinyi injured? Let me take a good look." Lu Yinyi said softly, "Martial Uncle Luo, Yinyi is ashamed. Fortunately, Master helped me, so I was able to escape." Qiu Hanyue looked at Luo Xiao curiously. She could tell that the latter was from the demon race and only thought of her as a concubine that Zhang Yan had left in the cave. Luo Xiao glanced at her and said in surprise, "What a beautiful little girl. Let me guess, You must be little sister Hanyue that Yenny always talks about, right? You're really beautiful and I can't help but feel pity for you. Qiu Hanyue was pure, so how could she be a match for an old demon like Luo Xiao? She was flattered by her words and beamed with joy, thinking that this big sister was a good person. Zhang Yan saw that they were talking non-stop and couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He waved his sleeve and walked toward the clear nether heavenly lake. Target equals _blank. Chapter 267. Zhao Yu Mountain was said to be connected to the Milky Way above and the netherworld below. It rose from the sky and into the clouds like a pillar that pierced the heavens. On its peak, there was the water of the heavenly lake that was thousands of miles wide. It was like a mirror that was made of ice and jade. When the fish leaped and the birds soared, the dew scattered and silver pearls splashed, changing into layers of light and shadows, shining with colorful rainbows. This was a place where spiritual beings gathered and the waters were deep. Not only was it a rare paradise, it was also rich in spiritual birds and strange fishes. The water belonged to the cloud sand. When Lu Yenny condensed the mysterious light, the cloud sand was carefully selected from this place. The heavenly lake underwater dwelling occupied a large area. There were 12 floors of palaces and every floor was connected by a jade corridor. When Zai Songyao was still here, he only focused on cultivation and had no one to order around because he did not care about the decorations in the cave. On the other hand, Luo Xiao, Shang Chang, and the rest of the Yuji beauties were fond of beauty. Zhang Yan had ordered them not to leave the mountain as they pleased. Therefore, other than cultivating, they were thinking about how to decorate the cave abode. As a result, they found many beasts with a little bit of spiritual intelligence to serve as puppets, commanding them to set up memorial archways and jade steps by the lakeside of Tianqi Lake, to build pavilions, water pavilions, palaces, and temples. They also ordered the beauties Yuji to gather countless spirit shells and pearls to illuminate the inner hall and decorate the buildings. Now that 20 years had passed, the heavenly lake of Zhaoyu was no longer as cold and quiet as it was before. It looked different. This level of the palace was the largest, and was usually used to entertain guests. Luo Xiao and the rest stayed in the 3rd level of the palace. In the past, they could only go to the 9th level at most, and if they went any further, they would not be blocked by the formation. The main residence was located in the deepest part of the 12th floor. This was also where Gui Songyao meditated and comprehended Tao. The treasures and books that he left behind were hidden in the depths without any restrictions. Without the permission of the master, one could not enter. Zhang Yan had received Gui Songyao's instructions. He knew the changes of the formation door and there was no need to enter from the main door. When he was above the heavenly lake, he gave Luo Xiao, Lu Yenny and the rest some instructions. Then, he made a gesture and a whirlpool appeared under his feet. He smiled, gathered his robes, and put his hands behind his back. Without hesitation, he stepped in and the scenery in front of him changed. In just one step, he was in the main residence. He looked up and saw that the cave was spacious, decorated with ice curtains and bright pearls, giving off a soft halo and warm jades. It was as if he was walking under the morning sun. The walls of the cave were translucent, like the clear water made of ice. Outside the cave, the lustrous scenery in the water could be seen clearly. On the 3rd floor, there was a jade couch. On it was a 2 feet large scallop. Inside, there was a soft cushion and silk. It could sit several people. It was wide open, and from time to time, water mist and ice crystals sprayed out. Cold air pervaded the air, and the coldness seeped into one's bones. There was also a large mirror embedded diagonally on the side of the shell. The surface of the mirror was like a mercury watermill, and it reflected the scenery in the cave. It was the most important treasure in the cave. This was a treasure left by Gui Songyao in the past. Not only could it form a world, but it could also open up a cave residence and nurture a spiritual vein. The 12th floor of the cave residence was nurtured by this treasure. It could be said to be the most important treasure in this place. Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He walked up the jade stairs and walked straight in. Waves of ripples immediately appeared on the surface of the mirror. In the blink of an eye, his entire body had submerged into it. When he stood still, he looked up and found that there was another world here. Below his feet was a stone floor. In front of him was a pond. Several round stones were piled up by the water. There were lotus flowers in the water, pink and delightful. On the other side was a green bamboo forest. Between the swaying spears, there was a garden pavilion. The corners of the eaves could be seen from the branches. Below the stone steps, the grass was green. In the distance, there was a high cliff. A jade spring turned into a clear waterfall and flowed down, crashing into the pond and making loud splashing sounds. Golden carps were jumping non-stop below, as if they wanted to go against the current. 10 feet away, there was a small boat floating on the surface of the water, drifting with the wind, letting the splashing water hit it. There was a black-robed scholar with a long beard sitting there, engrossed in fishing. However, he sat there without moving, like a statue, not noticing Zhang Yan's arrival. Zhang Yan knew that this black-clothed scholar was the true spirit in the mirror, which meant that he was the spirit of the cave in Clear Nether Lake. All of the formations and restrictions here, the profound secrets of the secret palace, he knew them all like the back of his hand, and could use them freely. He smiled, stretched out his hand, and shot a spell at the spirit. The black-robed scholar suddenly shivered, as if he had suddenly woken up. He turned around and saw Zhang Yan standing not too far away. A look of joy appeared on his face as he hurriedly threw away his fishing rod and hurriedly walked over from the surface of the water. When he arrived in front of him, he bowed deeply and said, "Is it Master? Ever since Master left, I have been waiting here for 20 years. Zhang Yan looked at him and said with a smile, "When I came here in the past, Master Gui said that he would hand over the books, pills, magical weapons and artifacts in the cave to you. He wanted me to ask you for them in the future. Let me ask you, is that true?" The scholar in black hurriedly said, "Yes, yes." When Zhenren and Immortal left, they left behind 237 books, 3 pill rooms, a cauldron for concocting medicine, 25 top-grade spiritual weapons, 2 profound weapons, 1 true weapon, as well as precious materials for refining weapons and a number of rare herbs and spiritual flowers. Other than me, who still needs to guard the cave and control the formation, you can take the rest of the items to refine and use at any time. Zhang Yan nodded and said with a smile, "Bring me to the place where the books are stored first." Gui Songyao was a kind person and never took the initiative to hurt others. Therefore, the 2 profound weapons were not weapons to kill, so he was not in a hurry to take them. But the books were different. Gui Songyao was a grotto heaven great demon. Although his cultivation method might not be stronger than Qinsong schools, if it contained his understanding of cultivation, then it would be a priceless treasure. Therefore, he wanted to take a look first. Now that the black-robed scholar had changed masters, he did not dare to disobey. He pointed his finger and a silver-walled cloud tower rose from the ground. The doors and windows of the tower opened, revealing rows of neat bookshelves inside. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and walked into the tower. He first stopped to take a look. Then, he took a book and looked at it. Seeing that it was only a travel book, he shook his head and put it down. He wanted to go to the second floor. However, at this moment, the scholar in black's expression changed. He listened attentively and said, "Master, there are people coming from outside the cave. They are saying that they want you to return their disciples." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and sneered, "They came fast. That's good. Let's settle this first." He flashed and walked out of the small pot mirror. He headed to the first floor of the palace. At this moment, there were 2 unfriendly Taoists in the hall. One of them was Tu Xian and the other was Songzhe. They were both disciples of the Xianmen aristocratic families. The Tu and Song families were one of the prominent families in Qinsong school. The disciples of these 2 families were captured by Zhang Yan, so they came to him. Tu Xian's face was long and thin. His lower jaw was slightly sharp and he had a mustache with 3 slits. He took a few glances and greed and envy appeared in his eyes. He chuckled and said, "Ever since the monster race was chased away, I have been to the Surging Waves Lake a few times, but it wasn't as exquisite as this. How is this Zhang Yan able to occupy such a paradise? Song Zhe was slightly surprised. He looked around and said in a low voice, "This cave belongs to the Patriarch's spiritual master. Brother too, don't talk nonsense. You need to know that the master and disciple are trying to catch us, so you need to be careful." Tu Xian picked up the teacup on the table and slammed it on the stone table when he heard this. He said unhappily, "This Zhang Yan is just a mystic light realm cultivator. If I had the North Dark Sword, I wouldn't lose to him. What kind of skill does he have?" Song Zhe shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Brother Tu, it's fine if you say a few words now, but when you see Zhang Yan later, don't go too far and give him some face. After all, my sons and nephews are in his hands. If you make him angry, I'm afraid my life will be in danger." Tu Xian snorted and didn't say anything else. Song Zhe let out a sigh of relief. He was angry. Zhang Yan killed Wan Zhang and went in as soon as he came back. He didn't show any mercy, but the righteous clear courtyard didn't take them away. After learning about this, he was shocked and hesitated. Although he knew that this was a shameful action, for the lives of his sons and nephews, he had no choice but to come. Tu Xian originally didn't want to come, but although the 3 people who were captured were disciples of the Song clan, they were his disciples. As their master, he had no choice but to come. The 2 of them waited for a while before Zhang Yan walked out from the inner hall. He bowed to the 2 of them and said, "I didn't know that you 2 senior brothers were coming. Please forgive me for not going out to greet you." As soon as he saw Zhang Yan, he sprang to his feet. Pressing his fingers together, he shouted angrily, "Zhang Yan, why did you capture my disciple? Hurry up and release my disciple." Zhang Yan laughed coldly and said, "Your disciple bullied my clan for no reason and was captured by me. Since the 2 of you aren't here to apologize, then there's nothing to talk about. Please leave." He waved his sleeves and was about to leave. Song just saw that the situation wasn't good. He had angered Zhang Yan. How would he get his sons and nephews back? After 3 days, according to Zhang Yan's way of doing things, he really was going to kill them. Because of this, he hurriedly came up to smooth things over. He smiled apologetically and said, Senior Brother Zhang, please wait. Senior Brother Tu and I are both disciples of Master Du. It's just that he has such a fiery temper. You don't need to pay attention to him. Song Zhe will apologize to you." Although he came up to beg with soft words, his words hinted at his clan's lineage. Zhang Yan knew that Song Zhe wouldn't bring up this matter for no reason. He thought for a moment and thought about all the cultivators with the surname Du. Suddenly, he remembered a name and said, "You are all disciples of Priest Du Sui?" Song Zhe hurriedly nodded and said, "Yes." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "What a coincidence. I heard that Wang Pan, the one I killed that day, was a disciple of Du Sui." Although Wang Pan was a disciple of Du Sui, he was only a disciple at the 3rd level of Clear Qi. Moreover, he hadn't been in the sect for a long time and didn't even know many people in the sect. Du Sui was one of the top 10 disciples in the sect. There were more than 100 people who claimed to be his disciple. Therefore, when Wang Pan was killed by Zhang Yan, he couldn't be bothered to ask about it. Song Zhe was begging bitterly, but he saw Zhang Yan standing there. Although he didn't leave, he didn't move at all. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind and he slapped his forehead, thinking, I'm muddle-headed. How could I forget about this? He hurriedly took a few steps back and took out a jade box from his sleeve. He respectfully presented it to Shen Lian and said, I heard that Senior Brother Zhang suffered a fright in the sect. This item is a sacrificial artifact refined by my clan. The name of this sword is Qiu Hong. I hope Senior Brother will kindly accept it and use it to calm your fright. Target equals, understood. Chapter 268. Tu Xian's plea. Although Song Zhe gave out the Qiu Hong sword, Zhang Yan just stood there with his hands behind his back and didn't reach out to take it. Song Zhe was startled at first, but he soon recovered from his shock. He turned around and strenuously signaled Tu Xian with his eyes. Tu Xian grunted and withdrew a jade box from his sleeve, tossed it to Song Zhe, and then walked to the side to sulk. Song just shook his head and smiled as he carried the jade box over, saying, "There's a heart-protecting water cloud mirror hidden in this box. Although it's not a rare magic treasure, it's quite effective when used to defend against enemies. My nephews are young and ignorant, and they've offended senior brother Zhang. I hope senior brother can forgive them on account that we're all from the same sect." Zhang Yan didn't care about these two magic treasures, as long as people knew that his sect wasn't to be bullied by others. Whether these two were sincere or not, since they had already bowed their heads on the surface, his goal had been achieved. Thus, he didn't have the mood to get entangled with these two. With a shake of his shoulder, a light flashed and the 3 disciples he had captured were thrown out. He said, "Two senior brothers, take these people back and discipline them well." Song just saw a flash of light and his 3 nephews appeared in front of him, but they were all unconscious. He couldn't help but be startled and hurriedly went up to check on them. Only after discovering that they were fine did he let out a long sigh of relief and took out a few medicinal pills to feed them. These people slowly woke up, and when they opened their eyes and saw Songje, they all called out, "Second uncle." Songje asked a few questions patiently, secretly probing what item Zhang Yan had used to capture them. However, these 3 disciples were at a loss and spoke incoherently. They didn't know why they were captured at all. After Zhang Yan stepped into the core transformation realm, he was even more adept at using the water element True Light and could make many changes. These 3 people fainted after being swept by the water element True Light. They didn't know what happened at all. Tu Xian walked over and glared fiercely at the 3 of them. He scolded in a stern voice, "How did I teach you 3 bastards? What a disgrace!" When the 3 of them saw that their master was also standing at the side, they were immediately startled and hurriedly struggled to get up to greet him. Even after being scolded, they didn't dare to refute. They all hung their heads, ashamed and speechless. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "Feel free to bring the 2 of you back and teach them a lesson. If there's nothing else, forgive me for not accompanying you." He flicked his sleeves and was about to leave when Tu Xian took a step forward and shouted, "Wait! Although this matter is over, I, Tu Xian, still have something to ask senior brother Zhang." Zhang Yan stopped and turned around to look at this person. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Is there anything else, senior brother Tu?" Tu Xian stared at him and said, "Zhang Yan, I want to bet with you. Do you dare?" When these words came out, Songje was shocked as well. Zhang Yan was slightly startled, but then he laughed loudly and said, "Since senior brother Tu is in such an elegant mood, Zhang Yan can accompany you. However, I am a direct disciple. If you want to bet with me, will it be in the name of fight or absolute fight?" Tu Xian looked straight at him with a fierce gaze and said loudly, "Absolute fight is killing people of the same sect. Tu Xian disdains that. Naturally, it will be fight." Song just slightly heaved a sigh of relief. If it was a fight, there was no need to fight to the death. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he said, "Since it is a fight, what item does senior brother Tu want to bet?" Tu Xian said in a deep voice, "I, Tu Xian, can bet all the wealth I have accumulated over 100 years just to make a bet with senior brother Zhang." Zhang Yan was interested and said, "I wonder what item I, Zhang Yan, have that senior brother Tu values so much?" Tu Xian looked at him with a burning gaze and said, "I only want that true moon leaf grass of yours." When these words came out, Songje looked at Tu Xian in surprise and suddenly realized something. He thought to himself, "I was wondering what's going on. Brother Tu usually isn't so impulsive and rash, but today he can't keep his cool. So this is what he has in mind. What a good plan." Zhang Yan didn't expect that the other party would know that he had the true moon leaf grass. However, he had used a lot of this item to help Gualai, so he said frankly, "Unfortunately, I used a lot of this grass in the past. Now I only have half of it in my hands." Tu Xian frowned. In the past, due to his carelessness, he failed to condense his core. However, if he had the true moon leaf grass, he could melt the little golden core and refine it into a pill. Regardless of the future, he could at least live for a few hundred more years. Ever since he knew that Zhang Yan had this item, he had coveted it for a long time. This time he challenged Zhang Yan, it was mostly for this item. He thought that having half of the grass was enough, but he said, half of the grass is a lot less. Since it's like this, I will decide the location of our fight. Zhang Yan laughed and said, Senior brother 2 isn't willing to lose out at all. Fine, you can choose a location. Tu Xian's eyes flashed and he said slowly, the day after tomorrow, you and I will fight on that Luanmingji. Zhang Yan gave Tu Xian a meaningful look. Even the location of the fight had been chosen. This person definitely didn't come up with this idea on the spur of the moment. He definitely came prepared. He also knew about that Luanmingji. He heard that it was a place where cliffs were like swords and rocks were suspended in the air. Tu Xian picking this place to fight with him was obviously to restrict his sword escape technique. However, he didn't care and immediately nodded in agreement. He said, all right, I will do as Senior Brother 2 says. Tu Xian was startled. This was somewhat unexpected. He originally thought that Zhang Yan would argue with him a few times, but he didn't think that the other would be so straightforward. Tu Xian was instantly overjoyed. Afraid that Zhang Yan would go back on his word, he immediately took a step forward and said, Senior Brother Zhang, I won't go back on my word. Do you dare to sign the contract with me right now? Zhang Yan chuckled and said, Men, bring me the brush, ink, and contract. Not long after, a servant who had transformed into a demon brought over a piece of paper and a brush. Lu Yanyi had been standing at the side the whole time. At this moment, she stepped forward to stop this servant. She personally picked it up and inspected it. After confirming that there were no mistakes, she nodded and let it go. Zhang Yan cast a praising gaze at her. He then spread the contract on the stone table. He picked up the brush and wrote his name in the bet. He then stretched out his hand and pushed it to Tu Xian. Tu Xian didn't stand on ceremony. He rolled up his sleeves and waved his brush. He then struck a spell on it and the contract turned into light and flew away. The place the contract flew to was the upright purity courtyard. After the deacons in the courtyard verified that there were no mistakes, they would send someone over to take away the bet between the two of them. They would then hang the contract in the merit courtyard for the disciples to see. This was to show that there were no tricks. Since they had already signed the contract, Tu Xian and Song Zhi didn't want to stay any longer. They said goodbye to Zhang Yan with cold expressions and left the bright darkness heavenly lake. All along the way, Tu Xian was extremely excited, and he rubbed his hands together as he said, This Zhang Yan actually dared to agree to a bet with me. Junior brother, you must help me invite all my friends and fellow Taoists to come watch the battle later, and watch how I extinguish this person's arrogance. Song Zhi frowned and said, When I observed that Zhang Yan today, I couldn't see through his cultivation. He is at least at the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. If he has already succeeded in concocting pills, how will Brother 2 deal with him? Tu Xian, however, laughed heartily and said confidently, Brother Song is worrying too much. I heard that Zhang Yan cultivates the Billowing Cloud secret manual, and only Master Sun knows a thing or two about the method of condensing the core in it. If he doesn't know the key to it, what are the chances of him winning? Even someone like Ning Chongxian doesn't dare to concoct pills outside and needs to go back to the sect to ask for help from Qi Yuntian. What ability does Zhang Yan have to concoct pills outside? If he really does that, then he will be cutting off his own path and won't be a problem in the future. Song Zhi thought about it and felt that he was thinking too much. It must be known that any disciple of the Dark Azure sect who attempted to condense their core would only dare to do so under the guidance and assistance of their masters. Even so, they would still tremble with fear as if they were walking on thin ice, deeply afraid that a single misstep would destroy their own Tao foundation. Take Tu Xian for example. He had the help of the elders when he was concocting his core, but because of his unstable state of mind, he messed up the steps and stopped at the small golden core realm. It could be seen how difficult it was to take this step. Tu Xian said proudly, Furthermore, there is a deeper meaning behind this. The direct disciples of the 6 rivers and 4 islands were humiliated by Zhang Yan in the past, so they must hate him to the bone. If I can defeat Zhang Yan this time, how can they not look at me? This is a great advantage for me. Song Zhi thought about it and shook his head with a bitter smile. That one Zhang was killed by Zhang Yan, but the Wan clan still doesn't dare to take any action because of their doubts. Senior brother's action is clearly taking the initiative to be someone else's pathfinder, which is very unwise. Tu Xian snorted coldly and said, "After I became a minor Jindan, the clan has long abandoned me, and Teacher Du doesn't care about me at all. If I don't take this opportunity to fight, how would they look at me in the eye? At least now I still have the qualifications to be a pathfinder. If I wait for a long time, when that Zhang Yan succeeds in concocting pills under Sun Jinren's guidance, how can I have such an opportunity?" Song Zhe also sighed. It was true. Being able to be a pathfinder proved that you were still useful. One had to say that if he could really defeat Zhang Yan, not only would he be able to regain the face of the clans, he would also be able to use this chance to turn the situation around. At the very least, he would be able to win back the true moon leaf grass. Taking a step back, this was a competition and not a battle of life and death. Even if he lost, the clans would see that he was the first to jump out and go against Zhang Yan. How could they just ignore him? Tu Xian's actions were indeed accurate. After the two of them left the bright nether heavenly lake, Lu Yinyi paced back and forth and couldn't help but say, "Master, disciple once heard that although Tu Xian seems to be at the mystic light realm, he is actually a small golden core realm cultivator. He also learned a powerful technique from Duda, so he probably didn't come with good intentions this time." In her heart, she had a lot of respect for her master. Just think about it. She had the help of her cultivation method and pills, but it was still so difficult for her to move forward in the sect. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, relied on his own strength to kill his way out of the lower house, and now occupied a cave all by himself. How amazing was this? She knew that if it was her, she wouldn't be able to do it. However, she couldn't help but worry when facing a strong enemy. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Disciple, you don't need to worry about this. Although Tu Xian has refined a small golden core, he's just a chicken and a dog in front of Master." Lu Yinyi was smart, and her eyes instantly widened when she heard this. She said with joy, "Master, you." She instantly understood that this master of hers had probably already broken through that realm and reached a level that many cultivators would never be able to reach in their entire lives. Target equals _blank. Chapter 269. Bestowing swords and dividing treasures. Zhang Yan had been searching for medicine outside for more than 20 years, and he had met many outstanding cultivators. He had even lost many souls under his sword, and it could be said that he had fought and killed along the way. It seemed like he didn't care about this kind of battle that didn't involve life and death, so he said as if nothing had happened, "Yinyi, when I watched you fight with Wan Zhang, although you were forced into a disadvantageous position, I saw that you didn't panic in the face of danger. You formed sword seals with your fingers and hid them in your sleeves, as if you still had the strength to fight. Let me ask you, have you learned the flying sword killing technique? Do you want to wait for the person to relax, then kill him with a surprise strike?" Lu Yinyi was surprised. She thought that she had done this secretly, but she didn't expect that Zhang Yan would still see through it. She couldn't help but say with heartfelt admiration, "Master can see 1,000 miles, disciple indeed planned to do so. 4 years ago, after receiving Martial Uncle's advice, I went to Ingluo Island to listen to a sword talk and learned a few moves of the flying sword technique. It's just that this technique is profound, and forgive disciple's stupidity for not being able to learn its essence. When faced with an enemy, I didn't dare to go all out and could only scheme to win by trickery." She had heard that this master of hers had once split light 16 times in one breath, and it was extremely impressive. She was deeply impressed, so she secretly made up her mind to learn that flying sword technique as well. In Qinsong School, there would be a sword talk on Ingluo Island once every 16 years. Not only would sword techniques be taught, but those with the best comprehension would also be bestowed with a sword pellet. When she heard about this, she gladly went. Unfortunately, this trip wasn't smooth. She used all her strength to fight several rounds with a female disciple called Yuan Yanhui, but in the end, she was still slightly inferior and lost, and the sword pellet was won by the other party. After listening to Lu Yinyi's explanation of the details, Zhang Yan pondered for a while, then finally shook his head and said, "This matter can't be blamed on you. The sword competition on Luo Island wasn't actually fair. If he was not wrong, that Yuan Yanhui was definitely like Feng Ming in the past, having already been secretly taught by a few elders and practicing swordsmanship for a few years. In this way, no matter how high one's aptitude was, how could one compare to her? Zhang Yan wouldn't have been Feng Ming's match if he hadn't had the help of the broken jade. He thought to himself, Yan Yi's foundation is solid, but even though it's stable, it's still much weaker when it comes to fighting with others. From what Yan Yi said, her comprehension in the art of flying swords is not low either. If she can really learn the art of the sword, then it'll really be a blessing. Thinking up to this point, he was filled with anticipation and said to Lu Yanyi in a warm voice, "My disciple, show me the swordsmanship you've learned." Lu Yanyi responded softly and immediately did as she was told. She cast a spell and a little white light flew out of the sachet. Under her control, it turned into a stream of light that flew back and forth, spiraling up and down like a graceful jade dragon dancing in the air. She demonstrated the sword moves that she learned from the righteous sword scripture, one by one. Zhang Yan watched carefully from the side, and he nodded to himself. He could tell that his disciple had put in a lot of effort in secret. Moreover, every single move of his was in accordance with the rules, and there was not the slightest flaw. The only flaw was in the sword ball. Flying swords were easy to learn but hard to master. Everyone could use the basic sword skills, but there were very few who could step into the upper realm. Even though there were many cultivators who could not enter the door due to their limited talent, there was another important reason, and that was that good sword sphere was extremely hard to find. Just like that time when Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao returned from the water country, they met Shen Yufeng who blocked the river to intercept them. Although this person used a sword sphere, because the quality was too poor, it was destroyed by the joint efforts of Zhang Yan and Luo Xiao using the heart-striking hammer. The sword sphere in Lu Yanyi's hand was only refined by white essence. Although it could use many flying sword-killing moves, it was too weak to fight against a strong opponent. She was also deeply aware of its drawbacks, which was why she did not use it when she fought with Wan Zhang that day. It was only when she was forced into a corner that she decided to pretend to be weak and prepared to take advantage of the moment when he was careless to suddenly use a killing move, hoping to turn the situation around. If she had a good sword sphere in her hand, why would she need to do this? Even if she used the sword escape, she would be able to contend with the opponent, and that white essence sword sphere could not do this at all. Zhang Yan shouted loudly, "If a worker wants to do a good job, he must first sharpen his tools. Disciple, what you lack is nothing more than a good sword sphere. Master once obtained one in the celestial market, now I will bestow it to you." He stretched out his hand and a clear light flew out and landed on Lu Yanyi's body. Lu Yanyi let out a low cry and opened her palm, catching the clear light in her palm. She saw a ball of lustrous brilliance rolling around there. It was agile and lively, and it was refreshing to the heart and spleen. It was very lovable. She hurriedly knelt down and bowed solemnly, saying, "Disciple thanks benefactor teacher for bestowing the sword." One must know that a sword sphere was not an ordinary talisman or instrument. It required a Yuanian cultivator to spend decades of hard work to refine it. Even a big sect like Qinsong School could not casually take it out. As for the sword sphere in Zhang Yan's hand, Yuanian Jinren used a total of 30 years to refine it. It could be seen how difficult it was to refine a sword sphere. After Lu Yanyi stood up, she let out a slight sigh. Zhang Yan said in surprise, "Disciple doesn't like it?" Lu Yanyi shook her head and said, "Disciple is happy that benefactor bestowed the sword sphere. It's just that disciple thought that even though I have the sword sphere in my hands now, junior martial brother Tian and junior martial uncle Luo still don't have a suitable talisman." Zhang Yan looked at her seriously and nodded in praise. "Yanyi, I'm very happy that you didn't forget your friendship with your fellow sect members. You don't have to worry too much. I've already made arrangements for this. Go and call your junior martial brother and junior martial uncle Luo over. Oh, and also Shang Chang and junior martial niece Hanyue." When Qiu Hanyue heard this, she knew that Zhang Yan had already made arrangements. She accepted the order and left. Not long later, she brought these people into the hall. Zhang Yan swept his gaze over them, and he naturally understood their cultivations with a single glance. Luo Xiao had already passed the 3rd level of the mystic light realm. He was currently burning his meridians and refining his yang fire, but he didn't know which level he was at. As for Shang Shang, with the help of the clear nether heavenly lake, in addition to her diligent cultivation, she had also reached the 1st tier of the bright Qi realm after more than 20 years. For a cultivator with a demonic body, it was already a remarkable improvement. Qiu Hanyue wasn't his disciple, but her talent wasn't bad either. She was the same as Lu Yenyi, also at the 1st level of the mystic light realm. Zhang Yan looked around and said, "This time, when I was searching for medicine outside, I also obtained many talismans. I have no use for them. What do you want? Go and choose." He shouted and waved his sleeve. Many magic treasures flew out at the same time. The binding phoenix vine, the jade pearl light flying needle, the escaping body flag door, the strike lightning seal, the black iron ruler, the protective lingji, the red copper sand, the alcohol shield of harmony, the fate-determining jade tablet, the gold magnetic copper mirror, the cloud overturning alms bowl, the dazzling Luo Daoist robe, and many other magical treasures were floating there. For a moment, the hall was filled with multicolored lights, the light of treasures shot into the sky, and the spiritual energy surged. Their eyes were filled with multicolored lights, dazzling and dazzling. It was rare for others to give one talisman to their disciple, but Zhang Yan let them choose. He was really generous. In reality, he still had many talismans on him. It was just that their origins were strange, and he was afraid that others would see through them, so he didn't take them out. Seeing that no one moved, Zhang Yan couldn't help but smile. He pointed at Lu Yenyi and said, "Yenyi, you are my first disciple, so you can take one first." Lu Yenyi's foundation was deep, so she had already regained her senses. Seeing that there were so many talismans in front of her, she knew that there was no need to be polite. She originally wanted a protective talisman, so after looking around, her gaze landed on the protective lingji. She walked forward and took it down with a raise of her hand. The blood essence on these talismans had long been wiped away by Zhang Yan. With a slight movement, she refined this talisman roughly, and with another hand seal, the lingji disappeared without a trace. Luo Xiao took a few glances and was quite interested in the binding phoenix vine. She raised her hand and pointed, saying delicately, "Master, I want this." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "If fellow Taoist Luo likes anything, just take it." "Thank you, Master." Luo Xiao chuckled and went forward to take the binding phoenix vine with a wave of her hand. Shang Shang knew that her cultivation level was low, and she was only used for guarding the gate, so she didn't need any talismans. She thought to herself, "I'm just a servant in the sect. Master treats me well, but I can't be presumptuous." Her gaze drifted around, and suddenly, her beautiful eyes lit up. She saw that among the many talismans, there were dozens of coral pearls strung together. It was a talisman that looked like a bracelet. It looked very inconspicuous, and it was originally a gift from the Demon King of Clear Feather Sect. It wasn't a rare item, so she went forward and chose it. Then, she retreated to the side obediently. Tian Kun was the youngest, but he was very decisive. At first, he went straight for the mellow shield of air containing harmony, and then he walked back with a satisfied expression. From the beginning to the end, he didn't even look at the other talismans. Zhang Yan nodded. This talisman was originally given to him by Gui Songyao, and now it could be considered as returning to its rightful owner. He turned his gaze again, and said to Qiu Hanyue with a smile that wasn't a smile, "Martial niece Qiu is also here today, so you should choose a talisman as well." Qiu Hanyue's beautiful eyes lit up, and she said, "Really?" She was originally envious of the many talismans, but she didn't think that she would get one of them. She also had the pure nature of a young girl, and she immediately cheered and ran forward to touch this and that, looking at that. She seemed to think that all of them were good. After staring for a long time, she finally seemed to have made up her mind. With a wave of her hand, she took the set of ray flying needles of 4 stars into her hand, and then pressed it against her chest. She lifted her head and looked left and right, as if she was afraid that someone would snatch it from her. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Back then, I killed Taihao School's disciple Tsing Han in the open sea, and this set of flying needles was carried by him. There are a total of 28 of them, but this talisman needs to be matched with needle techniques. Just now, I can put it to use. Martial niece Qiu, don't regret choosing this item." Qiu Hanyue wrinkled her nose and pouted and said, Martial uncle, you look down on people too much. My Qinsong school also has needle techniques. Moreover, when you go back and ask your master to refine these flying needles, you will definitely be able to change your appearance. You won't have to look so gloomy and horrifying." Zhang Yan smiled slightly and didn't say much. He bestowed the treasure to this girl, but that was because he had an ulterior motive. He only wanted to rope in Fan Chongqing, and as for what would happen to the flying needles in her hands, he didn't have the heart to care. Seeing that everyone had taken their talismans, he waved his big sleeve and put away the remaining talismans. Then he turned to Lu Yenny and said, "Yenny, there are still 3 years before the school's competition. In the next few days, you don't have to go out. I can give you some pointers, so don't slack off." The Qinsong School's competition was held once every 24 years. Back then, because Zhang Yan had to go out to look for medicine, he didn't make it in time. Now that more than 20 years had passed, there were still 3 more years before the next competition. In the past, when Lu Yenny walked in the school, she would look 3 times at every step, afraid that she would be tricked. But now that she suddenly had a master to look after her, she felt that everything was going smoothly, and the string in her heart was slightly relaxed. Hearing this, she suddenly felt a chill in her heart, and secretly warned herself that the path of cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If you don't advance, you will fall back. She must guard against arrogance and rashness, calm down, and cultivate properly. She couldn't slack off at all. She held her sword in hand and said solemnly, "Yenny wouldn't dare." After Qiu Hanyue received the flying needles, she was happily playing with them. When she heard the word school's competition, she seemed to have thought of something. She blinked and raised her head and said, "I heard that martial uncle is going to fight with that Tu Xian the day after tomorrow? And you even chose to fight at Luanmingji?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Martial niece Hanyue, you know quickly." Qiu Hanyue let out an "ah" and couldn't help but anxiously stomp her feet, and said, "These disciples of aristocratic families are the most unkind. Luanmingji is the most dangerous place, and they might have some strange tricks up their sleeves. No, I need to tell master." After saying this, she hurriedly rode on the conveyance light, and turned into a light rainbow, flying out of the cave. Target =_blank. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.